The Senate Judiciary Subcommittee on Antitrust this morning is holding a hearing on the proposed merger of AT&T and Time Warner. The committee is looking at whether that merger would be anti-competitive or whether it would result in innovation. We expect to hear from AT&T CEO Randall Stephenson and the CEO of Time Warner, Jeffrey Bewkes. This, by the way, has to be approved by federal regulators before it goes through. President-elect Trump said on the campaign trail that he opposes this merger because he said it concentrates too much power in the hands of too few. Live coverage from the Dirksen Senate Office Building here on C-SPAN 3. It should start in just a moment.
Welcome to the Subcommittee on Antitrust Competition Policy and Consumer Rights. Before we start, I'd like to thank Ranking Member Klobuchar and for her staff in preparing for this hearing today. I'd also like to thank the Chairman of the full committee, Senator Grassley, for his support for the hearing. After I and Senators Klobuchar, Grassley, and Leahy give their opening remarks about this hearing, we'll hear from our panel of witnesses, and I will introduce those witnesses shortly, and then we will have 7-minute question rounds from members of the subcommittee. We're living in what some might describe as sort of a golden age of television. One TV writer recently commented that for the first time I've begun to feel like there may, in fact, be too much good TV, if that were possible. From Game of Thrones to House of Cards and so many other programs across so many television networks and so many different platforms, the quantity and quality of programming content may well be greater today than it ever has been in the past or ever could have been predicted. The creativity, however, is not limited to content creators. Networks and distributors are also innovating to allow consumers new and unprecedented access to their content of choice. No longer are consumers limited to whatever bundle their local cable operator might have put together for them. Dish, Sony, and DirecTV all offer cable bundles allowing consumers to stream live television over the internet. Netflix, Amazon, HBO, CBS, among others, allow consumers to purchase programming directly. And more innovation is on the horizon and coming at us very quickly. As many industry participants expect 5G wireless technology to provide even more competition to broadband and landline cable, opening up even more possibilities to content creators and to distributors. This brings us to the very reason why we're here today, to discuss the proposed acquisition of Time Warner by AT&T and ensuring this flourishing marketplace for creative content retains its vibrancy regardless of the outcome of this proposed acquisition. AT&T is the second largest wireless carrier in the United States, and through its DirecTV and U-verse subsidiaries, the largest U.S. cable or satellite provider. Time Warner is currently the world's third largest television network and filmed TV entertainment company. In late October, AT&T announced that it reached a deal to purchase Time Warner for $85 billion. The proposed transaction would combine AT&T's millions of wireless and pay television subscribers with Time Warner's media lineup, which includes CNN, TNT, HBO, and Warner Brothers Film and Television Studio. Now, the companies claim that this acquisition will result in significant benefits for consumers. The combined company will provide a, quote, stronger competitive alternative to cable and other video providers, and, quote, better value, more choices, and an enhanced customer experience for over-the-top and mobile viewing. Additionally, by controlling the customer experience from content creation through distribution, the combined company says it'll be able to innovate its advertising practices and introduce customized or targeted advertising, providing both an improved customer experience and a significant competitor to digital advertising giants like Google and Facebook. This transaction involves no horizontal overlaps. However, if this fact ended the antitrust analysis, then this would be a very Seinfeldian hearing, a hearing about nothing. Although vertical deals typically raise fewer concerns than do their horizontal counterparts, such deals nevertheless may still tend to substantially lessen competition. The key analysis takes place, of course, under the Clayton Act. The principal concern with vertical integration is foreclosure or denying access of competing firms to suppliers and customers. A key question thus becomes, what will the incentives and opportunities be for the combined firm after the transaction takes place? Many critics of the deal have posited that all sorts of potential anti-competitive abuses may take place, and that the combination of AT&T Time Warner could create. AT&T could increase the price of or reduce access to Time Warner content to rival television distributors, thereby not only raising its rivals' costs, but also making its DirecTV products appear more attractive to consumers. This risk is particularly acute in the nascent online video services market. Over the past few years, we've seen the development of products like Sling and like PlayStation Vue, which allow customers to watch a live stream of cable channels via their internet connection. And DirecTV has just begun its own similar service called DirecTV Now. AT&T's ownership of HBO, CNN, and the other must-have television products of Time Warner could give DirecTV Now a significant competitive advantage over its competitors. AT&T's ownership of these channels could also potentially force DirecTV's rivals into a Hobson's choice of higher prices or limited Time Warner content, knowing that many customers would migrate to DirecTV if its rivals refuse to pay the higher Time Warner prices that they would have to pay in that circumstance. The potential anti-competitive favoritism that the combined firm could bestow on its own products is not limited to price or access, but extends to the quality of the offerings as well. And it's here that we get to the siren song of zero rating, whereby a wireless or broadband distributor excludes particular data from counting towards its customers' data consumption caps. Now, on its face, zero rating appears to be customer-friendly. The content is free for subscribers and helps them to avoid having to pay overage when they exceed the applicable data caps. However, critics argue that zero rating transforms internet service providers or wireless carriers from, quote, relatively neutral conduits into gatekeepers. The FCC recently expressed concern that AT&T's zero rating practices, quote, may obstruct competition and harm consumers by constraining their ability to access existing and future mobile services not affiliated with AT&T. Now, critics say that such concerns would only be exacerbated if AT&T were able to bring Time Warner content under its fold and under its ownership. However, as the FCC letter itself illustrates, in regard to this merger, we also have a regulatory framework that's designed at least to minimize, if not to eliminate, many of the positive posited anti-competitive concerns that have been expressed. The issues raised by this deal are complicated, and like most antitrust analysis, particularly most antitrust analysis in a deal that's this big and that's this complex, they're necessarily very fact-intensive. The focus of the analysis should remain on maximizing consumer welfare, and consumer welfare is in turn maximized when we focus on protecting competition, or rather than protecting individual competitors from competition. While the final determination regarding the competitive impact of the deal will be made by the Department of Justice, I believe we can make a valuable contribution to the conversation today by closely examining the questions raised by this unique and significant transaction. I look forward to hearing from and engaging with our uniquely talented and capable panel of witnesses today, and covering any issues that might come up. Senator Klobuchar will now give her statement.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for holding this important hearing. Like you, my initial statement here started out with examples of these great new offerings, and we seem to have the same ideas. I was going to mention Game of Thrones, or as you once called this hearing, Game of Phones, right? And instead, I now will switch to Westworld to show how flexible I am in this new era in Washington. So examples of the content we are seeing from a variety of sources, HBO's Westworld and The Wire, to Netflix House of Cards, to ESPN's 30 for 30 documentaries. We're seeing critically acclaimed and popular content coming from a wider range of networks and video-on-demand services. Perhaps even more important, we see diverse voices being heard, with networks representing different viewpoints and interests. This has been referred to by both of us as the golden age of television. However, it really is actually not quite accurate. Increasingly, we stream shows on our computers, tablets, and mobile phones rather than simply watching them on televisions. And consumers are relying on their broadband or wireless connections instead of their cable connections to receive that content. This competition has increased consumer demand for video content, which has benefited the content creators. According to the Writers Guild, there were 305 comedy and drama series during the 2015-2016 season, compared to 204 in 2010 to 2011. Earnings for the Guild's writers have grown by almost 50%, from $570 million to $854 million in the same time period. But there are still problems, and we know what they are because as U.S. senators, we hear about them when constituents talk to us on the street or call our offices. The cost of cable television continues to be a burden on too many consumers. According to a report released just this morning by Consumer Federation of America, the typical household, which is in America now 2 cell phones, 1 landline, and a video internet bundle, spends about $2,700 per year on these services. When you think of a middle-class income, that is a chunk of change. We have seen this plot before. Like a tired movie franchise, we can predict the ending before it begins. The promise of thriving competition collapses, replaced by dominant firms with monopoly power. We saw it in radio and television with the development of centralized networks, and finally in cable with the rise of cable distributors and their local monopolies. This is the central question of this hearing. Will this transaction accelerate the disruptive forces that will increase competition, spur innovation, improve quality, and lower costs? Or is this one step on the road to a few dominant firms controlling content and distribution? One school of thought believes that vertical transactions in which a distributor of content acquires a supplier rarely, if ever, undermine competition. I reject that approach. Whether an acquisition will harm consumers depends on factual investigation and careful analysis, not ideological presumptions. The Federal Communications Commission and the Antitrust Division of the Department of Justice have largely followed this practical approach in reviewing mergers and acquisition in this industry. In the interest of American consumers, I hope that the new administration continues that tradition. AT&T's acquisition of Time Warner combines one of the world's largest wireless cable, including satellite TV and broadband providers, with one of the world's largest media and entertainment companies. There are three broad questions that I think we need to look at. First, will the acquisition increase AT&T's incentive and ability to suppress competition? Various distributors of video content have raised concerns that AT&T will increase the prices that its competitors pay for Time Warner content or deprive its competitors of access to that content. Independent content providers raise similar concerns. Will AT&T, post-transaction, favor its own content over independent content? If pursued, such tactics could increase the costs that distributors charge consumers or undermine the development of innovative distribution models. Even more troubling, the merger could stifle the diversity of viewpoints and focus offered by independent content providers. Independent content providers are responsible for much of the innovation and diversity in programming today, but they already face a tough landscape having to negotiate with large distributors. The second question, will the merger produce benefits? According to the parties and supporters of the transaction, combining programming content with video distribution would allow AT&T to develop new innovative offerings for consumers, improve content creation, and allow AT&T to better compete with Facebook and Google. I appreciate that AT&T just last week launched DirecTV Now, which allows customers to access DirecTV's programming through the internet. These potential benefits need to be examined. But I want to be clear, if this transaction is found to be anti-competitive, the need to compete with other companies is not a justification. The solution for less competition is not even less competition. Finally, if concerns exist, would conditions remedy these problems? Conditions have been used in the Comcast-NBC Universal merger, which shares some similarities with this deal. There is, however, disagreement about the effectiveness of those conditions. Further, there is growing skepticism that conditions that attempt to limit a company's conduct can ever work. Mr. Chairman, I've received a statement from Consumers Union articulating their concerns about the transaction. I move that this statement be included in the record. And this is a very important transaction. I'm glad that we are taking a close look at it today, and I look forward to hearing from the witnesses.
Thank you. Those will be submitted into the record without objection. We're now going to hear opening statements from the chairman and ranking member, respectively, of the Judiciary Committee as a whole. This, of course, is a subcommittee of that committee. Chairman Grassley.
Yeah. Also, instead of saying at the end, I may have questions for the record, because after 11 o'clock I may not be able to be here. I thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding this hearing on the biggest transaction of the year, the proposed AT&T Time Warner merger. This deal would combine one of the nation's largest phone and internet providers with a media entertainment titan that, among other things, owns HBO, CNN, TBS, TNT, and Warner Brothers Studios. By expanding into media and entertainment, AT&T strengthens its existing wireless, internet, and pay TV business and also becomes a premier content owner. The Justice Department and possibly the Federal Communications Commission will determine whether to approve or reject this merger and decide whether or what conditions should be in order for the parties to proceed with the transaction. Nonetheless, this committee's oversight responsibilities is an important one where the committee can flesh out potential issues and highlight possible impacts of the merger on the market and consumers. It's an understatement to say that this industry is undergoing tremendous change. People are constantly reevaluating what, when, and where, and how they access the media, entertainment, and content. Technologies are quickly evolving, and delivery platforms are converging. Companies are improving their technologies so that customers can enjoy better and faster connectivity. Innovation is creating more options and allowing for multiple combinations. The creativity of programming content and device apps is flourishing to satisfy any and every consumer taste, young and old. Consumers are becoming increasingly knowledgeable about content offerings and their data consumption needs. No doubt, this industry is going through a transformation and a disruptive time, and consumers are going to enjoy and are enjoying the ride. So we want to make sure that this revolution in technologies and content continues to thrive and evolve to the benefit of all consumers all over the country, including rural communities like mine in Iowa. More content choices and accessibility options, better quality and affordable prices make for a happy consumer. AT&T and Time Warner say that this vertical merger will, in their words, benefit consumers, strengthen competition, and encourage innovation and investment, end of quote. They claim that by consolidating the assets of the two companies, it will be able to better compete nationwide and meet expectations of consumers. Now, however, critics of the merger say that this deal will have a negative impact on competition and innovations. There's concerns there that a combined AT&T Time Warner will block competitor access to popular Time Warner content. There's concern that a combined company will give preferential treatment, for example, favorable channel placement and zero rating pricing to Time Warner's premium entertainment programming, then to the disadvantage of other content producers, in particular small independent producers. There's also concern about AT&T Time Warner's ability to leverage their assets to negotiate better licensing arrangements or raise the price of their content to the detriment of other distributors. There's concern about the merged company's ability to employ bullying tactics to dictate rates and terms to other networks. There's concern that this acquisition will concentrate too much power into one conglomerate, resulting in higher prices and fewer programming options for consumers. There's also concern about the merger's implication for a free and diverse media. This is something that I recently experienced because on weekends when I'm at the farm, I always watch Channel 349 on DirecTV. I found out that it wasn't there anymore. I asked why and found out what is going on is an unfair contract negotiations. Now, these are all serious concerns which should be scrutinized carefully by antitrust regulators tasked with reviewing this transaction. At the same time, some warn that we should be careful about how the AT&T Time Warner deal should be examined because of the dynamic nature of the industry, complexity of the marketplace, and fast-paced innovation and changing consumer wants and demands. They question whether the current merger analysis methods are well suited to tackle this transaction and urge caution when determining the competitive effects of mergers between different complex interconnected platforms. Secondly, they suggest that they may need to redefine market power and reassess how to analyze it in a fast-shifting industry with multi-sided platforms. With tech giants like Google, Facebook, Amazon, Netflix, and others changing the way consumers access contents, it's legitimate to ask whether, as one AEI scholar recently said, quote, what looks straightforwardly anti-competitive in the old industrial merger models might not be so simple in the merger of modern media platforms, end of quote. Certainly, the AT&T Time Warner deal warrants close and careful scrutiny because it raises all these complex issues and concerns. We want to ensure that the proposed merger doesn't allow an unfair advantage over competitors or facilitate anti-competitive practices with anti-competitive effects. Yet, we also need to be thoughtful, forward-looking analysis of the market that takes into account the complexities of modern interconnected media content and telecom platforms and relationships. Ultimately, we want to ensure that competition thrives in this critical market and we don't stifle innovation or deter emergence of cutting-edge technologies that consumers demand. Ultimately, we want to ensure that our policies don't lead to higher costs, fewer choices, and worse services for consumers. I look forward to our discussion today. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Leahy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm glad that Senator Lee and Senator Klobuchar are having this hearing. I'll resist the temptation to go through the list of which shows I like the most or which things I use the most. I see too many people I know in the audience, and I'm afraid I'll either make some happy or unhappy, depending upon what I include or leave out. But I think it is an important hearing because the proposed, no matter whether you support it or oppose it, you have to agree the proposed almost $85.5 billion merger can dramatically transform our nation's telecommunications and media landscape. It will combine two titans of industry. And when you have this kind of a massive consolidation of distribution and content, it raises serious questions. Was it due for competition or consumer choice or privacy across the media or pay TV, wireless, broadband industries? We have to look at that carefully. 130 million Americans depend upon AT&T for their wireless internet access. Last year, they acquired DirecTV's satellite television service, now seeking to acquire Time Warner's content. These raise the questions, the obvious questions, about whether AT&T could begin to act as a biased gatekeeper for its own affiliated content and services. We know from the questions raised about the decision not to charge its wireless customers for data used to view DirecTV on their phones. Anti-competitive and anti-consumer actions by internet gatekeepers can be prevented under the FCC's 2015 Open Internet rules to establish clear, enforceable, bright-line prohibitions of blocking or throttling, discriminating against lawful content on the Internet. A meaningful net neutrality protection ensure the Internet remains an open platform, one that fosters innovation and free speech. Strong net neutrality rules help mitigate concerns about a post-merger AT&T's ability to harm competitors and consumers. But these net neutrality rules, which I believe currently protect consumers, appear to be under serious threat by the incoming administration. The president-elect has been openly opposed to net neutrality. He's formally named 3 staunch net neutrality opponents to oversee his FCC transition. And I think any weakening of these rules are going to cause serious harm to consumers, and harm that would only be exacerbated by what we assume will be further mergers in the industry. That harm is not limited to this transaction, but impact all Americans who rely on the free exchange of ideas and information on the Internet. As Chairman, I'm going to submit questions for the record where I have some duties involving appropriations at the moment, but I'm very concerned about this. I know you are. I know Senator Klobuchar is. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Leahy. Your questions and those to be submitted by Chairman Grassley and anyone else will be admitted without objection. Okay, we're now going to turn to our witnesses. I'm going to introduce them, then we'll swear them in, then we'll hear from each of the witnesses. We'll start from my left and move to my right. Randall Stephenson is the chairman and CEO of AT&T. Mr. Stephenson was named to his current position in 2007. Since then, AT&T has invested to become a global leader in providing integrated communication services to businesses and consumers. Hang on. Got to make sure that I don't mess yours up with someone else. Video entertainment, high-speed internet, and mobility to IP network services and the Internet of Things. Mr. Stephenson began his career with Southwestern Bell's Telephone Company in 1982 in Oklahoma. He served as the company's senior executive vice president and chief financial officer from 2001 to 2004, and from 2004 to 2007, he served as the company's chief operating officer. He was appointed to AT&T's board of directors in 2005. He's a member of the board of directors of Emerson Electric and Boeing, a member of the PGA Tour Policy Board, and national president of Boy Scouts of America. Mr. Stephenson received his BS in accounting from the University of Central Oklahoma and his Master of Accountancy from the University of Oklahoma. Jeff Bukes is chairman and CEO of Time Warner, Inc. He was elected chairman of the board of directors in January 2009, having served on the board since January 2007. He was elected CEO of the company in January 2008. Prior to being named chairman and CEO, Mr. Bukes served as Time Warner's president and COO from January 2006 to December 2007, and as chairman of the Entertainment and Networks Group from July 2002 to December 2005. Before joining the corporate management of Time Warner, Mr. Bukes served as chairman and CEO of HBO and as president and COO of HBO. Mr. Bukes serves on the boards of Yale University and the Partnership for New York City and serves on the advisory board for the Creative Coalition. He's also a member of the Business Council. Mr. Bukes has a BA from Yale and an MBA from Stanford. Mark Cuban is an entrepreneur and investor. He's the owner of the Dallas Mavericks, Landmark Theaters, and Magnolia Pictures, and is the chairman of the HD-TV cable network, AXS TV. He's also one of the main shark investors on the ABC reality television series Shark Tank. In 1995, Mr. Cuban and fellow Indiana University alum Todd Wagner started AudioNet, combining their mutual interest in Indiana Hoosier college basketball and webcasting. With a single server and an ISDN line, AudioNet became Broadcast.com in 1998. By 1999, Broadcast.com had grown to 330 employees and $13.5 million in revenue for the second quarter. In 1999, Broadcast.com was acquired by Yahoo for $5.7 billion in Yahoo stock. Gene Kimmelman is the president and CEO of Public Knowledge. Previously, Mr. Kimmelman served as director of the Internet Freedom and Human Rights Project at the New America Foundation and as chief counsel for the U.S. Department of Justice's Antitrust Division. Prior to joining the Department of Justice, Mr. Kimmelman served as vice president for Federal and International Affairs at Consumers Union. He's also served as chief counsel and staff director for the Antitrust Subcommittee of the Senate Judiciary Committee and legislative director for the Consumer Federation of America. Mr. Kimmelman began his career as a consumer advocate and staff attorney for Public Citizens Congress Watch. Mr. Kimmelman is a graduate of Brown University and holds a JD from the University of Virginia, where he received the Fortsman Fellowship. He was also a Fulbright Fellow. He presently serves as a senior fellow at the Silicon Flatiron Center for Law, Technology, and Entrepreneurship at the University of Colorado and is senior associate with Global Partners Digital. Daphnis Emmett is a filmmaker, founder of a music label, philanthropist, and author living in Beverly Hills, California. She's the president and chief creative officer of Cinemoy, a television network focusing on film, fashion, and international style, founder of a music label, Unicorn SST Records, a writer, director, and award-winning author, and a philanthropist. Ms. Emmett works as a writer, producer, and director. Her latest film, Footsteps, debuted on Showtime. Ms. Emmett also serves on the advisory board of the philanthropic arm of the State Department, IREX, as well as the board of trustees of Children's Institute International. Is a chairperson of ABC Love, Adoption Brings Children Love. Before we begin, I'd like to swear in the witnesses, and so if you'd all stand and raise your right hands. Do you swear that the testimony that you're about to provide to the subcommittee will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Thank you. Mr. Stephenson, you'll be up first, and you may begin. If you could push the button until it turns red, we can hear you better.
And the rest of the members of the committee, I appreciate the opportunity to talk about the benefits of combining AT&T's distribution with the world-class content of Warner Brothers, HBO, and Turner. And for your constituents, we believe the benefits are straightforward and they're substantial. They will get more choices and lower-priced options, and that means more nationwide competition against the cable companies in each of your respective states. What this merger is not about is consolidation, either in media or in telecom. AT&T is a communications company. We distribute content. Time Warner is a media and entertainment company. They create content. And this is a classic vertical merger, and it eliminates no competitor from any market. In fact, it increases competition, particularly against the cable companies. And our intent is to disrupt the existing pay TV model. We want to get the most content to the most people at the lowest prices. And we want consumers to pay for their content once and then watch it anywhere and anytime. Every episode, every season, on whatever device they choose. But disrupting entrenched business models is hard, and it generally takes bold steps. And combining scaled distribution with scaled content creation is such a step. It's going to allow us to accelerate innovation, and without exception, when one company accelerates innovation in a market, everyone accelerates innovation. And faster innovation in content delivery will naturally accelerate deployment of 5G mobile networks with greater than 1 gig speeds. And we've seen this happen before. It's important to recall that we launched the world's first iPhone at AT&T on a 2G network. And as demand for the iPhone and more bandwidth exploded, the U.S. mobile industry accelerated deployment of 3G and then 4G mobile networks, and this drove 2 multi-billion-dollar network upgrades in the course of 5 years. And we're about to experience this again. DirecTV Now and other planned innovations with Time Warner are 5G services that are effectively going to be launched on 4G networks. And just as we witnessed with the iPhone, we expect 5G deployments to accelerate, and not just for AT&T. We think it will accelerate it across the industry, creating even more competitors for cable. And this is exactly what we believe consumers want: new, lower-priced options and the power to decide themselves. And a good example, as has been referenced in the earlier comments, is our new DirecTV Now product that we launched last week. This is 100 channels starting at $35, streamed to any device. The customer has no contract requirements, no credit check, no installation, no set-top box, and the price includes the data charges for mobility AT&T customers. And during our first week in the market, the uptake of this new service has exceeded all expectations. And as predicted, the industry has already begun responding. In fact, just last week, shortly after we announced this product, CBS added the NFL to its all-access streaming service at no additional cost. Innovation by one invariably begets innovation by all. I've talked a lot about what will change because of this merger, and I want to really quickly talk about what will not change. AT&T will continue to be a leading investor in America. We've invested more in the United States than any other company each of the past 5 years. You should expect that to continue. We'll continue to do our part in keeping America the global leader in 2 specific areas: innovation and deployment of advanced communication networks, and creating content people want to watch. And we'll encourage and support independent journalism. And we will not withhold content to disadvantage somebody else. Time Warner was built on a platform of broad distribution of its content into every home, and it would be illogical for us to change that. And finally, you should expect AT&T to continue doing what we've always done. That's distributing a wide array of diverse, high-quality content across all of our platforms. So in conclusion, this merger is going to drive investment It's going to drive innovation in an industry that we believe is begging for both of those. And so, Mr. Chairman, I thank you for the opportunity and look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Stephenson. Mr. Bukes.
Chairman, thank you, Chairman Lee, Ranking Member Klobuchar, and members of the subcommittee. Thank you for inviting me. I'm Jeff Bukes, Chairman and CEO of Time Warner Inc. I appreciate the opportunity to talk to you this morning about why a combination with AT&T not only makes sense for Time Warner, but also is good for consumers. In short, combining Time Warner's video content with AT&T's distribution will accelerate the development and delivery of the next generation of video services, providing consumers with greater choice, convenience, value, and, importantly, better affordability. Before I talk more about that, let me briefly tell you about Time Warner. Since 2009, we've been focused on producing and distributing video content, film, television, and video games at the wholesale level across a wide range of outlets. We do this through 3 divisions: Warner Brothers, Home Box Office, and Turner Broadcasting. We do not own any cable, satellite, telephone, broadband, or wireless distribution business. And as a video content company, our success depends on achieving the broadest distribution of our content and on embracing innovative ways for consumers to enjoy what we have to offer. Warner Brothers is a great example of this. It's the leading television studio in Hollywood because the most talented producers, directors, and writers come to us to make their shows. The reason they do that is they know that Warner's will find the best home for their shows on any network or over-the-top service. Warner supplies shows to every broadcast network while also producing for basic cable networks, premium cable services, including both HBO, its competitor Showtime, and services like Netflix and Hulu. Warner has also been a leader in innovation, including making it possible for viewers to watch the full season of its shows on demand on broadcast networks. Those principles of broad distribution and innovation hold true at HBO, whose success depends on reaching and passionately engaging viewers, whether they subscribe to a pay TV service or only have broadband. That's why we launched HBO Now, which offers HBO's programming without the need for a pay TV subscription. The same is true at Turner. Turner must distribute its networks, which depend on subscription and advertising revenue, broadly across all platforms and devices. That's why Turner has licensed its networks to new broadband-delivered bundles offered by Dish, Sony, DirecTV, and Hulu. We're proud of what Time Warner has accomplished, but today we're competing for consumers' attention, not just with other TV networks, but with everyone from Netflix and Amazon to YouTube and Facebook. Great content is not enough. You need to deliver great consumer experiences, and that's what joining with AT&T will allow us to do. We'll continue to work with all distributors, but combining with AT&T will make it easier and faster for us to innovate for consumers, including offering more choice in network bundles with great interfaces, great on-demand content, and interactive features, more over-the-top services like HBO Now and Filmstruck, more short-form content, particularly on broadband and mobile. Currently, when we try to introduce innovations for consumers, we often need to roll them out distributor by distributor as part of lengthy affiliate agreement negotiations that take place only every few years. TV Everywhere is a pretty good example of this. We introduced TV Everywhere in June of 2009. It was based on the simple idea that if you subscribe to a pay TV service, you ought to be able to watch your favorite programs not just on TV and on the TV set, but on any connected device of your choice at no extra charge. It's now 7 years later, and TV Everywhere still isn't fully embraced by all the cable distributors. By combining with AT&T, we can accelerate the process of introducing innovations on a nationwide basis, and we can have more flexibility to adjust to changing consumer expectations, providing consumers with more choices and better experiences at more attractive prices, while spurring industry-wide competition and innovation. That's why we believe this transaction is right for our company and good for consumers. Thank you. I'll be happy to answer questions on any of these points.
Thank you, Mr. Bucus. Mr. Cuban.
Thank you for inviting me to give my testimony and speak before you today. My name is Mark Cuban, and I've been an active entrepreneur in many fields throughout a career spanning over 3 decades, having started or invested in more than 200 companies, creating thousands of jobs. I'm also proud of the fact that a TV show I'm part of, Shark Tank, helps inspire millions of potential entrepreneurs every week. The media world has changed. Back in 1995, a partner and I started a company called AudioNet and billed ourselves as the broadcast network on the internet. We were one of, if not the very first streaming content aggregator and distributor on the net. Back then, the biggest competitors to our online streaming and consumption of our content were radio and TV. The world has changed quite a bit since then, but maybe not in ways that are obvious. Historically, TV had been the dominant medium. We all used to wonder why we spent so much time watching TV. When asked why TV, my answer was always the same. TV is the best alternative to boredom. It's the closest we can come to doing nothing while thinking we are doing something. It was always our go-to way to kill time. Those days are gone. In the past, we went to our media. We came home, turned on the TV, plopped down on our favorite chair or couch and vegged out, pulled out a cold beverage. Today, our media comes to us. How content comes to us is changing almost daily and has become an important subject in the world of antitrust and media and distribution. Today, our best alternative to boredom comes from an app. Firing up an app on whatever device you happen to have in your hand, no matter where in the world you are, is how we kill time. The idea that TV is the dominant content delivery mechanism no longer is valid. Instead, we fill our time by consuming content from Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, Messenger, WhatsApp, and slowly from virtual reality companies like Oculus Rift. Combined, these apps reach more than 1.5 billion users a month. They can deliver any kind of content in any manner the consumer would like to receive, be it message, video, VR, post, ad, you name it, to populations around the world in a manner that dwarfs television. Facebook is without question in a dominant position, if not the dominant position for content delivery. Imagine what Facebook and their respective competitive landscape would look like if they had not acquired Instagram, Oculus Rift, or WhatsApp. If those were separate companies competing in the marketplace, the content world will look much different and be far more competitive. Facebook may be the biggest player now, but they are not the only major content provider. Snapchat is taking over millennials as the best alternative for boredom. We all have seen the never-ending stream of selfies, videos, and more take over some of our kids' lives. For those younger than the Snapchat generation, and yes, they do exist, there is Musical.ly and Lively with tens of millions of users and growing, or Microsoft's Minecraft, an acquired property with over 100 million users. I can tell you from personal experience, punishment for my 7-year-old is taking away his Minecraft videos. He could care less if he loses TV privileges. TV is experiencing a declining share of content consumption. It is losing viewers to the other dominant content players in Netflix, Amazon with Prime, and Twitch, an acquired property, Apple with Music, Beats is an acquired property, and finally Google with YouTube, also an acquired property. And Google's the ultimate programming guide, their search. Given our time constraints, I will pick another time to discuss the impact of having only 2 companies, Google and Apple, that act as the sole gatekeepers to the app ecosystem. But you may have noticed I have not mentioned AT&T or Time Warner yet, because neither is in any sort of dominant position. By themselves, AT&T and Time Warner will have a very difficult time controlling their own destinies, let alone trying to exert influence on a market. This merger is not only one of survival and opportunity, but one that is needed by consumers. We need more companies with the ability to compete with Apple, Google, Microsoft, Amazon, and Facebook. Delivering content to consumers in this app-driven world is not easy. It is very expensive and difficult. Apple, Google, Amazon, Microsoft, and Facebook are 5 of the 7 most valuable companies by market cap in the world, and all have established dominant positions. That is exactly what the Time Warner acquisition, why the Time Warner acquisition for AT&T is an important strategic content acquisition. Alone, it will be very difficult, if not impossible, for either to compete with the companies I mentioned. Together, it will still be difficult, but they will have a chance to battle the dominant players and increase consumer choice and competition for consumer attention. I've run out of time, but I'd like to also say that each of the largest content companies I've mentioned so far, Facebook, Google, Amazon, Microsoft, and Apple, present much, if not all, of their content algorithmically. At least with good old-fashioned TV, we get to pick the channels we want rather than have our feed tell us what we want. Thank you, and I'll look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Kimmelman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Senator Klobuchar, members of the subcommittee. On behalf of Public Knowledge, and today I'm joined by Consumer Federation of America on our statement. I appreciate the opportunity to testify. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to ask that the report we released this morning that Senator Klobuchar referred to with CFA be put in the record. I know it looks like great bedtime reading to you by its size.
Without objection.
But I start here because this is about a description of the last 20 years of activity in this industry, which I think is relevant to look at this morning as you consider the impacts of this merger. All the leadership of the committee pointed out all the potential pros and significant cons of this. I raise this because what it shows is that $2,700 that consumers are paying per month, there are a lot of issues as to why that number is so big. During that 20 years, there were times when lax antitrust oversight allowed substantial mergers of cable and telephone companies and content companies. There were times when there was limited regulation. And what we conclude is comparing the prices consumers are paying with the actual competitive costs, we're probably being overcharged by at least about $45 per month. Your constituents for those services, because there are too few players already in these markets. They're massively concentrated. So in that context, adding firms that have more than 130 wireless subscribers nationwide, 25+% of all TV viewers through satellite and wire, bundled services with market power, and the wonderful content that Mr. Bucas described with Time Warner raises very significant questions for consumers. Now, they've talked about all the wonderful things they could do. I want to highlight they are excellent companies that have begun to compete more aggressively in the over-the-top market. They're doing really good things for consumers. That's wonderful as separate companies contracting with each other and others in the marketplace. The question for antitrust review and regulatory authorities is, will that continue? They've described what they have done very well, and we applaud it as benefits to consumers in many instances. But will that really continue? With these enormous assets coming together, and in a market where there are very few players, just ask your constituents, how many broadband providers do they have? How many cable or other comparable TV providers that can give them the full panoply of services? How many are there? And I appreciate Mr. Cuban's points, but the last time I looked, Google and Facebook weren't charging me more than $200 a month to get those apps, to get their content. And the last time I looked, you all may remember this too. Do you remember when you as teenagers or your kids spent more than like an hour on the phone talking to friends? Do they do that anymore? No, Snapchat, apps. It's voice service that has gone here. But that is not the same as professional quality video that Mr. Bucas' company produces. That's something different. And every one of those companies Mr. Cuban referred to relies on the fundamental infrastructure, the plumbing of the internet and telecommunications system that is controlled by very few companies, 2 dominant cable, 2 dominant phone, including AT&T. It is that market power that concerns us. And is this just hypothetical or possible? Well, the Department of Justice and FCC have already found that in comparable transactions, including Comcast, NBCU, when you combine this kind of quality content with market power, there are enormous incentives to favor yourself and harm competitors, block competitors, raise prices to rivals. And this deal is even bigger. That was a regional cable monopoly. This is nationwide satellite TV distribution, nationwide wireless. The incentives will be even greater. In that environment, the bottom line is we urge law enforcers to reject this merger unless they can absolutely show that these competitive harms will not arise, that there are actual paths to increase benefits to consumers, and absolutely show that they truly have the regulatory tools in an environment where it appears regulations will be withdrawn and oversight will be limited. This is not just about money, Mr. Chairman, members of the subcommittee. It is the diversity of programming owned by different people over different platforms that fuels our democracy. No one has said it better than the president-elect. It is in that environment we urge you to look at this carefully and enforcers not to take risk with a transaction that could be harmful to that democratic process and consumers' pocketbooks. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Zimmern.
Chairman Lee, Ranking Member Klobuchar, and members of the subcommittee, I want to thank you for inviting me to testify today about the impact of the proposed AT&T Time Warner merger on minority channels, cultural diversity, gender diversity, and independent programmers. My name is Daphne Edward Ziman, and as many of you know, I've spent the last 20 years of my life coming here to advocate on behalf of women and children. I'm here today as the founder, president, and chief creative officer of Cinema, a woman-owned, 24-hour, award-winning television network dedicated to curated films, high fashion, international lifestyle, and environmentally profound programming. Cinema is an independent network that is trying to make a difference in the media industry. It's designed to lift the image of women. Cinema is defined by high-quality content. Originally, we launched on DirecTV on September 17, 2012. Cinema is available on Verizon Fire, Frontier, and via the internet and reaches millions of subscribers. Cinema is a true independent. We chose not to be a part of a bundle because doing so would undermine what Cinema is and would stifle our creativity. Cinema is also a minority-owned channel, as it is one of the only two networks majority owned by a woman. The other one is Oprah Winfrey, and she's distributed by Discovery. Independent programmers are the risk takers that provide innovative content. Today, 90% of the content on TV is controlled by 6 conglomerates. The industry is currently structured to shut out new entrants, which are mostly independent programmers, and keep channels like Cinema from making it and providing competition to incumbents in the industry. Independent programmers understand very well the pressures that MVPDs face from giant content providers. But more consolidation is not the answer. In the current state of the media industry, the survival of independence is at a significant risk. Further consolidation would be catastrophic to diversity, additionally silencing minority and women-owned voices. AT&T claims that vertical integration is not harmful. The fact is that vertical consolidation gives AT&T both the means and the incentive to discriminate against independents. For example, Cinema competes with many cable networks, Turner Classic Movies being one of them, which is owned by Time Warner. DirecTV's own Kantar research showed that 2/3 of TCM viewers also watch Cinema. In a non-vertically integrated market, competition between Cinema and TCM is in the best interest of the public. But when AT&T owns Time Warner, shutting out competitive channels like Cinema is not only easier, but cheaper. Such loss falls upon the American people. AT&T argues that OTT distribution offers sufficient opportunities for independence, but relying on OTT is a one-way ticket to bankruptcy. Like other independent networks, Cinema is negotiating deals on these new platforms. However, linear distribution, because of its broad reach, remains the most effective way to develop awareness, brand recognition, and consumer demands. The OTT market is a maze of confusion and lots of contents that's not organized. Approximately 20% of television households are cord cutters, not because of preference, but because of the intolerance to the lack of curation, bundles of repetitive and copycat programming. The remaining 80% should not be denied programming that meets their needs and interests. OTT revenue alone will never allow independent networks to compete with incumbent channels that enjoy multiple revenue streams. Moreover, AT&T controls the distribution to more than 172 million cable, internet, and mobile subscribers and can utilize a variety of techniques to favor its own content and disadvantage independent networks like Cinema. These concerns are real. DirecTV and AT&T is currently under investigation by the Justice Department for unfair tactics against programmers. In fact, independent programmers are only offered channel on AT&T if they sign a pay-for-play deal with DirecTV. That's precisely what happened to Cinema. Look at the panel testifying today. It is supposed to represent a broad cross-section of the industry, yet it is dominated by white men. The idea that opportunity is lacking for women and minorities in media isn't hypothetical. It is clearly symbolized by these days. Women are the majority of the population, controlling 14 trillion in wealth, two-thirds of the country's wealth, and 70 to 80% of all household spending. Yet only 2 networks are owned and controlled by a woman. Women deserve presence in the media. The airways AT&T utilizes belongs to the American people, bestowed upon the MVPDs by the people, for the people. And AT&T has a fiduciary responsibility to utilize this resource in the best public interest. That obligation includes creating opportunities for cultural diversity and democracy of voices. Sadly, AT&T is doing everything in its power to avoid a review by the FCC, the one agency that could review this merger through public interest lens. So the question for policymakers is this: does a company that will go to any lengths to avoid public interest scrutiny really care about democracy and cultural diversity, the survival of independence, risk takers, or innovation? The American consumer is ultimately the one that will be worse off from further consolidation in this industry. If we learned anything from this last election, it is that the American people are angry about the growing divide between the haves and the have-nots. Independent programmers are the have-nots in the media landscape. Diversity of content is in the public's best interest. Okay, I have things to say if you'd like to ask questions. Thank you. Sorry.
Thank you, Ms. Simon. Okay, I will now kick off the questioning. Mr. Stephenson, I'd like to start with you. I'm going to ask you a very simple question. Will this merger, assuming it's carried out to completion, will it result in lower prices for consumers? And if so, how and why?
I was asked that exact same question in front of this committee a couple of years ago when we were working on the DirecTV transaction, and I represented that yes, it would, by virtue of the innovation. We'd be able to bring lower price capabilities to the consumer. And literally within a year. Of course, it wasn't
the exact same question because it was a different context.
But it was a very similar transaction in that the lower prices would be a result of the innovation that would follow. And within a year and a half of that transaction closing, the innovation has followed. And in fact, there have been 2 significant innovations. If you're a DirecTV customer, you can stream all of that content to your mobile device, no charge. And then we launched, as I said, last week, DirecTV Now. This is a little over a year since we closed the transaction. 100 channels at $35. And I think that is significant innovation that did result in lower prices to the consumer. And $35 includes the mobile streaming. So as you put two companies together under one umbrella, and this is why it's so important, Senator, if you'll bear with me a moment, you can speed innovation like you can never do in arm's length relationships and transactions. DirecTV is a classic example of how that happens. What we are talking about doing by combining Time Warner and AT&T is taking the innovation in DirecTV Now to a whole different place and a whole different level, because our ambition is to ensure that the customer pays for their content only one time. Because today a customer pays for their content. If they want to watch it on a mobile device, they probably have to pay for it again via an app. If they forget to watch a show and they want to go look at it on over-the-top means, they'll have to pay for it again. Our objective is to take that out of play. Pay for it one time, give the consumer the ability to watch it anytime, anywhere, on any device they want. We think that will result in lower prices and a lower cost to the consumer.
Mr. Kimmel, what's your response to that? Mr. Stephenson tells us it will result in lower prices. What do you say?
Hard for me to see it for sure, Mr. Chairman, because in the DirecTV deal, which we had concerns with, but which were addressed by regulators and the antitrust officials, there were clear efficiencies of putting together a bundle that a satellite company could not do on its own for transmission. It couldn't really offer both video and broadband. So I am extremely pleased to see Mr. Stephenson's companies responding to that and taking advantage of those efficiencies to lower prices. I don't see those here in this transaction. They could contract to do the same things that he's talking about as wonderful innovations without the risks of the merger.
Mr. Cuban, what's your reaction to the answers given by Mr. Kimmelman and Mr.
Yeah, that's not really my wheelhouse, so I don't have a comment on.
Got it.
Yes.
Mr. Bukes, I'd like to turn to you on a slightly different question. You can get back to that if you'd like, but I first want to ask you, so I'm encouraged to hear that Time Warner's business model is based on broad distribution for content. Other companies obviously have taken a different approach. Netflix, for example, has been a successful company. It's got a market cap at $52.9 billion, and so that's a viable option to take a different approach. Can you tell me how Time Warner weighs broad distribution versus exclusive content? How do you balance those?
Sure.
Relative attractiveness.
We've been able to build our network, CNN, HBO, TNT, Cartoon Network, only because we have broad distribution. And if we were to, and we've never done this, if we were to not offer our networks over any of the cable, satellite, telco, or over-the-top platforms that are now the place where increasing number of Americans are choosing which one to get their TV service through, we would be cutting off meaningful revenue for our company. There's no incentive for us to do that. That's first. Secondly, we invest a lot of money in making these brands relevant. CNN, HBO, if you all think about them. And we'd be doing that in a manner where we'd be hurting the very investment we're making and having these brands mean something. Third, there's a considerable amount of advertising support behind the Turner networks, including CNN. And if we didn't have full coverage, we can't sell advertising effectively to advertisers. Fourth, it's very important, and it's essentially the lifeblood of our company, to be able to attract the best talent, the best directors, the newest movie idea. These come from independent producers. They come to us because we have the resources and the distribution reach to put their product in every home. If we didn't have that, we wouldn't be able to get the next hit show, the next hit movie. So those are essentially the reasons why we would never even think of doing this. And then a final point, which, Gene, you might want to comment on. We owned Time Warner Cable for 20 some odd years, either a big piece or a minority piece, and we managed it. It never occurred to us to do anything either restrictive or different in terms of price, position, packaging, access to networks for that company when we owned it versus what we then did after. So there's just simply no incentive for us to do it, and in fact, there's really no ability for us to do it. It would hurt our business.
There's no incentive. Could those incentives change over time? Couldn't those incentives result down the road in you taking a different path?
No, Senator, I can't see a case, and I'd invite anybody here to try to propose one where that would make any sense at all.
I see Mr. Kimmelman shaking his head. Do you want to add something to that, sir?
I totally understand Mr. Bugus's point and his description of his business, and it's exactly what NBC said when they came before you and they were being combined with Comcast. In a careful analysis, the Antitrust Division did not find when the companies merged that those incentives were the same and that there were opportunities. And while Time Warner Cable was, 15 million subscribers, and certainly it made no sense to limit Time Warner content to just 15 million, here you have 25+ million from AT&T satellite and video, and you've got more than 130 million now wireless. With that customer base, you have to look at the real combined incentives. This isn't Time Warner Entertainment, Time Warner's incentives as a content company. This is the merged AT&T with content, and I just think the antitrust officials are going to need to look carefully at those.
Okay, I see my time's expired, and we want to stay on the clock here. We're going to go next to Senator Klobuchar.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I want to start with Mr. Stephenson with your initial question about the prices for consumers, and I know you focused on the last deal with DirecTV and what had come out of that. Just to be clear, on this acquisition, do you believe that it's going to lower prices for customers for DirecTV, broadband services, and mobile services, when you want to take each one?
I can and intend to represent to you that by virtue of innovation with Time Warner and going head-to-head against the cable providers with new products and new capabilities, that we will bring the consumer better priced options than what they have today. To take each one of those apart, I find difficult because the consumer has gotten to a place where they're not procuring each one of those independently. That's the reason for the way we're pricing DirecTV now. Think about what we're trying to do. We're going against a cable provider to compete. You buy TV service from a cable provider today, you spend $50 to $100 per month. Regardless of how much you watch, it does not change what you pay. If you sleep with the TV on all night long, it doesn't change what you pay. To compete against a cable provider, we have to bring a mobile service, and we're competing with a mobile service that has the same characteristic. Can you make it where the consumer does not think about how much they're leaving the content on? As we work with Time Warner and begin to think about new forms of content, cloud-based DVRs, getting the rights and putting those kind of capabilities into our product offering, bringing more value to the consumer, giving them the ability to use video over their mobile device just like they do when they're watching cable TV, we think that's a huge value to the consumer.
Okay. Mr. Kimmelman, because you have your new report coming out today, 46 a month you say that cable subscribers are paying that they shouldn't pay. So how does that fit into what Mr. Stephenson was saying when he's arguing, well, this is a new kind of offering that could help bring those prices down?
It is a new kind of offering. It is extremely welcome in the marketplace to see the DirecTV Now offering and challenging cable, which no one traditionally has gone out of their historical telephone region or cable region to challenge each other. All good. That's all pre-merger. Mm-hmm. I applaud that. The question is what happens when you combine all of these assets. And that's the fear. And again, it may be a wonderful product. Mr. Stephenson says pay once. Sounds great to the consumer. But if it's what happens to others who want to get on that service, if it's zero rated, are they all going to get on? What happens to others who want to offer a different product? Are they all going to be able to get Time Warner content under the same terms and conditions or unbundled the way that, I mean, so there are a variety of competitive harms that have to be looked at in comparison to what they want to offer.
And I want to end with that, but before I get there, I just want to talk about this issue that Mr. Cuban raised, with the competition with potentially the new environment with Facebook and Google, and I'm hoping we're going to have a hearing on some of these broader communications issues next year. That was my little. Okay, so, but on this generally, how do you see this when Mr. Cuban says, well, no, they need this to be able to compete in this new world, but you point out that they're not paying money for the Google or Facebook apps, right?
Senator Klobuchar, I would urge the committee to look at every place there is market power in this sector. There could easily be that in the online distribution, on the platform, among the platform companies. When I was at the Department of Justice, we looked at a transaction involving Google and a company called ITA, and we were prepared to challenge it. It was airline services online software that we thought would foreclose competition in that market. And a consent decree was worked out, but there can be legitimate issues in many places. But the fact that those companies are prosperous and may be doing things that are harmful does not take away from the fact that here we have very few ways for the consumer to get to their apps, their other services, and AT&T is one of the dominant gatekeepers to get there.
Okay, Mr. Cuban.
Yeah, I would disagree with that. It just, on its surface, but DirecTV Now is an example. If Apple decided they didn't want to distribute it, they have nothing. If Google decided they didn't want to distribute it, or either decided to give it such placement that people would have a hard time finding it, they have no business there. And so they really can't even control their own destiny, and I think it's an issue that's out of their hands, despite what Mr. Kimmelman is saying.
Okay. I want to just end here on the content side here with you, Mrs. Ziman. You described this practice you referred to as pay-to-play and talked about how it harms independent programmers. Could you explain that more, and do larger networks have to pay to play?
Yes. Independents now barely can get on at all. If they do get proposals, it's usually free for a period of time, or otherwise pay for play, which means they have to pay to access the subscribers, which means that they cannot survive.
Because they're not going to be part of the bundled package?
They're not, but not just that, because they're not given the bandwidth to be able to access. And if they are, they're sent to Siberia. So, and the reality is that the MVPDs are concerned that any of those independents may become must-have content, because then they'll have negotiating power. My friend, Mr. Cuban, has negotiating power because he owns a sports team. The reality is that one of the highest executive at DirecTV said to me, point blank, we're in the male sports business. So you're dealing with independents that have so much other content that the public wants and is interested in, and they're not getting access to the public. And that's wrong. It's wrong for democracy.
All right. Speaking of sports, Mr. Stephenson, in your testimony, you say that programming is more valuable when distributed to as many eyes as possible. However, NFL Sunday Ticket is available only through DirecTV. And during the Comcast-NBC Universal merger, the parties made similar arguments, yet the FCC decided that the merged company would have incentives to limit the distribution of its content and discriminate against independent content providers. I want to make sure I understand your position. Are you saying mergers where a content distributor acquires a content producer can never raise antitrust concerns, or that in this particular situation there's not an issue? And how do you answer this fact that there's a lot of concern here about, with AT&T owning content at the same time as distribution, that there would be discrimination?
I'll try to take the question apart and make sure I answer it fully. The NFL is probably a classic example of a content owner who pretty much determines and dictates how content is distributed. And they're very strong. They have a great product, and they parse the content up significantly, and we pay them for whatever rights we can get from them, okay? So they they determine how the content is distributed. We don't. We distribute it to our customers for what we pay. It's not something that we just exclusionarily put it out there. It's what the NFL has contracted with us to do. In terms of, I want to make sure I understood the second part of your question as to a vertical merger. Do I think that's just a cookie cutter?
Right.
No, I don't think there's such a thing, particularly in the world of antitrust. I believe this particular merger, when you put it together, you see that before the merger and after the merger, the competitive market looks identical. The distribution market looks identical. The content creation market looks identical. There are no overlaps. And so it is a classic vertical merger. But the Department of Justice will look at this. And to the extent there are concerns, we do believe they can be remedied with conditions. As it relates to the comment about independent programmers, though, I'd like to just quickly respond. If there is concern about access of independent programmers to the consumer, the one model that does not work, and we're demonstrating that, is the present model. The present model needs disruption. It needs a different model. That's what we're trying to do with both this transaction and the prior transaction we did. But the reality is, when we acquire content from content owners, there is a medium by which if we want the top content they own, they say, take that plus the other 5 or 6 channels that you possess. That is what's filling up this program guide. It's not anybody trying to be exclusionary. It is filling up the program guide with peripheral stuff that you have to take if you want to get the primary content that a content owner wants. DirecTV Now is step 1. Acquiring Time Warner is step 2. But DirecTV Now is how we're skinnying down a lot of that peripheral stuff, getting a smaller bundle that the consumer wants. That's how you get to a $35 price point rather than an $80 price point. That's where we think we have an opportunity to keep doing more and more of this in the future.
And just last, I know, response to Ms. Ziman very, very quickly, but you could foresee that there would be some of these bundles that wouldn't involve sports.
Oh, of course. In fact, there is a huge segment of our market that wants a bundle that does not include sports. Sports is probably the biggest driver of the content cost in the bundle today. And to the extent we want to meet a certain price point for a certain segment of our customers, getting sports out is the way you drop the content cost and get a lower price point in the market. It's really important.
Except for the NBA Dallas games. All right. Okay. Thank you.
Senator Hatch.
Church Apostles is here today, and I'm helping to host them. So I'm thanking you very much for allowing me to go ahead here, and my colleagues as well. Now, this is an important hearing and an important subject we're considering today. I'd like to begin by quoting briefly from an op-ed published yesterday in Forbes that I believe frames how we should approach the subject of today's hearing. The central question in any merger review is how the transaction will impact consumer welfare. Because AT&T and Time Warner are not competitors, concerns about increased market power or loss of competition, the sorts of concerns we often see in large mergers, apparently do not apply. Rather, the pertinent inquiry is whether AT&T ownership of Time Warner content will lead to exclusive dealing, improper favoritism, or other acts that narrow consumer choice and reduce service quality. At the same time, we should carefully evaluate the parties' claims that the merger will benefit subscribers by, for example, expanding the amount of available content that doesn't count against monthly data caps, unquote. Now, I hope these principles can guide our discussion today, and I ask unanimous consent that a copy of the op-ed that I wrote be entered into the record.
Without objection.
Now, Mr. Stephenson, you've pushed back pretty strongly on claims that AT&T will have an incentive to favor Time Warner content over non-affiliated content, or to withhold or threaten to withhold Time Warner content from competing broadband providers. Now, I'd like you to spell out your argument for me. Why wouldn't it make economic sense for AT&T to use its ownership of Time Warner content to raise prices or attempt to freeze out competitors? And why wouldn't it make economic sense for AT&T to degrade service speeds for non-affiliated content?
I'll start with why we would have no incentive to preference, if I could paraphrase your question, I think I understood it correctly, Time Warner content over others. And I think it's important to understand, and I've thought a lot about this, we're paying, including the debt, over $100 billion for Time Warner, investing a lot of our shareholder money to acquire this content. It's very, very unique content. And you heard Mr. Bucas earlier explain the business model, and how he built a business that is worth $100 billion, which is quite a feat in and of itself. The business model's fundamental premise for attracting talent, for attracting investors into content, the fundamental premise of that is wide and broad distribution of their content into every home. particularly in the United States of America. While one could argue, and I'm sure the Justice Department will look at this closely, while one could argue that it might advantage our distribution business to somehow give proprietary access to Time Warner, it would make no sense to a $100 billion business we're acquiring to do that. It would impair the value of that business dramatically. And I've received a big education from Jeff on this. The Clint Eastwoods, the Steven Spielbergs will not bring their talent and their capabilities to a company like this that is limiting the distribution of that content. It is a fundamental basis of the value of the company. So I don't see, first of all, the economic rationale, and nor do I see, from our standpoint, the customer rationale. Because at AT&T, if you go back to the distribution side, we have built our franchise on a very open model. If there is content that the consumers demand and want, we want it out there. We have little value if we start limiting access to content. We are what we call an open source company. We're not smart enough to know everything the consumer wants, whether it be an app, whether it be a smartphone device, whether it be content. So we try to open our network up to all and accommodate all that want to come in and let the customer choose what they want. So limiting the content that our customers can get in this day and age of the internet is candidly, for a distribution company, not a smart business move.
Well, thank you. Let me just ask this question to Messrs. Stephenson and Bukes. I'd like to zero in on the benefits to consumers. Now, how specifically will this merger benefit consumers? And I'd like you to share specifics, not generalities. And to give an example, Mr. Stephenson, in your testimony, you talk about DirecTV Now. How will this merger help you deploy DirecTV Now? And how will that service benefit consumers?
Thank you. DirecTV Now, it took the DirecTV acquisition to make that a reality, to get a relationship with content players and the ability to gain the rights, the content rights, to distribute their content to mobile devices. That's how DirecTV Now became a reality. What we essentially acquired from the content owners was only that, the ability to distribute their content, to the extent that we want our customers to be able to store their content. Once they've paid for it, they would like to store it. We call it a cloud-based DVR, but think about just storing the content. To the extent that our customers would like to be able to take that content and interact with their friends on social media with that content. They'd like that. We gained none of those rights in these negotiations to bring DirecTV Now to market. As we look towards the day after this closes, and we have ownership of the Time Warner content, with ownership, you can begin to do those kind of things. We can give our customers the ability to store Time Warner content. We can give them the ability to interact socially on Game of Thrones and Westworld and so forth that they cannot do today. We are convinced, just like with DirecTV Now, once we got certain content players to come on board, others began to come on board. I am convinced that model will play out again. As we begin to innovate with Time Warner content, giving our customers unique and different capabilities, other content creators will follow.
Okay, Mr. Bukes, just to finish with you, in your
Yes,
testimony, well, let me just ask this question of you. In your testimony, you say that the TV Everywhere initiative you launched in 2009 hasn't grown the way you hoped that it would. How will this merger help you deliver more content to more consumers more quickly? And to both of you, I ask, how will this merger affect the prices consumers pay? Now, you've somewhat answered that, but if you could spend a little more time on it, I'd appreciate it.
Thank you. I think the way that it would advance that effort, which is to put video on demand capability on all our networks, and we hope that would drive competition to have every network that you have on your television dial be on demand. So you could watch whatever network you want, whenever you want. You don't pay again to do it. You have increasing numbers of shows, so if you find a show in the middle of the season, you can go back and watch the first one, and you should be able to watch it on your iPad or on your mobile device without any further charge. We instituted that change and offered it for no charge whatsoever 7 years ago. We announced it with Comcast back in that day, and we hoped that all the distributors, cable, telcos, would pick that up and offer to consumers full VOD across every channel on the dial, just the way HBO had done again, for no extra charge in the 90s, and it's the way Netflix or YouTube works today. Here we are 7 years later. In many parts of the country, if people were listening to this, they would say, I don't have this in my home. I'm not used to going to Channel 4 and looking at NBC or watching FX on demand. I think if you look at the DirecTV Now offering, we've been saying very publicly for 5 years, we think that consumers need interfaces that work the way Netflix, Xfinity, and the way the AT&T one works, where it's easy to find shows, it's easy to search across networks, it's easy to do all of that, again, at no extra charge. And we think by putting this competitive offering into the market where you have full VOD on all these networks that are in your DirecTV package, and at a price that's basically, it's either half or less than half the prevailing price on average in the country, that's going to force competition both at the distributor level, all the other cable and telephone and satellite companies, and it's going to force competition at the network level, where other networks that have held it back, looking to get price increases out of it, realize they ought to just grant it and give people a better deal.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Franken.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm a little confused about something, which is this basic premise that HBO, for example, attracts its talent because it has the widest possible distribution. No, I don't think that's why talent went to HBO. I think talent went to HBO, as I remember, because it was very high quality and it was actually exclusive. So it's the opposite. In other words, that when The Sopranos was on, you had to pay to get the Sopranos, and everybody wanted to see The Sopranos. So this idea, which is this basic premise, that everybody went to HBO because we guaranteed everybody would see you, ain't true. So I just don't get that. Now, Mr. Bucas, you were recently quoted in a New York Times article responding to my concerns about how a combined AT&T Time Warner could prioritize its own content and restrict other distributors' access to it. You quickly dismissed those fears, saying that engaging in such behavior would not be in the company's best interest, and, quote, it would be like selling toothpaste and not putting it in Duane Reade. Mm-hmm. It doesn't make any sense. That's your quote. I'm not sure it's your analogy that makes any sense. It's not like selling toothpaste and not putting it in Duane Reade. HBO isn't a toothpaste. It's like CVS, or it could be CVS manufacturing the greatest toothpaste in the world and not letting Duane Reade sell it. Or more to the point, it's like selling Game of Thrones and not letting Comcast subscribers watch it, or very likely, you'll get the answer to the question after I ask it.
I'm sorry.
Okay? Making Comcast pay more for the privilege of having Game of Thrones or Veep or the rest of the lineup. Now, I want to be clear what we're talking about here. Should this deal be approved, nothing is preventing a combined AT&T Time Warner from going to any of its competitors in the pay TV market and charging double for access to Game of Thrones and Veep, etc. Or the combined company could simply restrict access to the programming entirely and wait for competitors' customers to flock to DirecTV or HBO's streaming services. I don't think these hypotheticals are outlandish at all. You'd have every reason to do this if you could, if that would make more money, and this is also Mr. Stephenson. You could make more money for AT&T in the long run. This is the incentive that's created by the merger. So, Mr. Bucas, I know you're eager to answer this. Do you agree that a combined AT&T Time Warner would have greater leverage when negotiating program carriage with other content distributors as a result of this deal? And do you agree that a combined AT&T Time Warner would have a financial incentive to use this leverage for its benefit?
May I? Okay. I was eager.
There was a long pause there.
I'm sorry I was so eager to answer. No, I don't agree. I don't think it would have, it would not have the incentive, nor would it have the ability to do that. It may require a back and forth, but let me try to answer the first part. No, we don't, all networks, whether it is NBC putting on the show Blind Spot, the show is on NBC. It's exclusive to NBC. That's where you have to go to watch it. If you want to watch House of Cards, you
didn't have to pay to get NBC.
Yes, you did, sir. You had to subscribe to $80 to $120 of network fees so that NBC could get paid that way. If you're talking in the case of HBO, Netflix, Showtime, those are a little different.
No, well, wait a minute. There's a distinction between HBO and NBC.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And HBO cost you money. You had to pay for that. NBC came with free with the package, whatever package you have. In fact, you used to be able to watch every TV show for free.
Right. So I think we all remember that term, pay TV. That was HBO, Showtime, Netflix, et cetera, where you have, as a viewer, the choice to either pay to have it in your home or not pay to have it in your home. And when you decide to buy that network for the month, you then get the shows on that network. House of Cards on Netflix, Billions on Showtime, Game of Thrones on HBO. Those are premium services. There's no advertising. If you don't like the content because of its nature, you don't have to have it in your house. It's quite a different business. But what I was saying, and the analogy is right on the toothpaste, is it would make no sense, and in fact, we could go into it, to not sell HBO on the Comcast cable system, on the Verizon cable system. It make no sense not to offer it.
Would it make sense for AT&T to use its leverage to charge Comcast more?
No, because we don't have the market power to do something like that, either at AT&T or at HBO. The market's way too competitive for that sort of thing. And remember also...
I really think Mr. Kimmelman might disagree with you.
Well, there's no history of anyone pulling off something like that. And this company's certainly not big enough at either end to do that.
Mr. Kimmelman, do you have any thoughts?
Well, it's this very concern that, again, NBC, these are wonderful businessmen. I understand their goal as to what they're doing in their business. NBC said the exact same thing. I'll just say the enforcers found that there were these incentives. They imposed limitations or would have blocked the transaction there. This is even larger. And
did they live up to the conditions?
Some. But there have been a lot of problems. I think companies like Mrs. Zimon's company would not have the resources to take even advantage of those tools. I think there are significant difficulties with conditions, which we could get into later. But there has clearly been a history of this kind of favoritism and discrimination. I'll just remind you, the bipartisan Congress in 1992 stepped in and required cable to sell its products, TV networks, where they were vertically integrated to satellite in order to allow satellite to get access to the product. You could have made the same argument. Why wouldn't we want to have more people getting it? Because it was a competitor to cable. I'm not worried about Comcast not getting Time Warner content in this instance. I'm worried about the online distribution that would compete with AT&T, that is growing right now, not being able to get exactly what it needs to be a real competitor.
Well, I'm hoping there'll be a second round of questions. Will there be? Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. And I just, I'm over my time, but I just want to say that I remember that people talent flocked to HBO because it was a premium channel and that people had to pay to go there.
Could I respond? I didn't get a chance to respond to Mr. Franken. I just...
the chairman.
Yeah, Senator, I just want to make a point that anybody, though, any household in America, and today any person with a mobile device can subscribe to HBO. I think that was the point we were trying to make. It's not exclusive to anybody. It's broad distribution. Anybody can get to it.
I'm talking about now. I'm talking about what built the franchise of HBO, and it was a completely different premise than what Mr. Bucus was presenting in his opening. And I just wanted to make that point, that it was not what attracted great talent to HBO. It was in a different model, and what built that franchise was a completely different model. We'll get to. I want to get to some other questions later.
Senator Perdue.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, in my business career, it seems to me that this economic miracle that we've enjoyed here over the last certainly 70 years, 75 years, was built on innovation, capital formation, and the rule of law. And this concept that we're talking about today, this vertical integration, by the way, is not a consolidation. I think that's very plain, and we need to remember that in the committee. But this economic miracle was built on transactions just like this in other industries. Vertical integration is nothing new. I personally have participated in it in order to compete, not to dominate. Size today doesn't necessarily correlate to dominance. When you talk about innovation and technology changes like we're talking about today, in this industry particularly, the consumer has benefited from the aggregation of the ability to deliver, as Mr. Stephenson said in his opening comment, they want to provide the most content to the most people at the lowest cost. That's called capitalism. If they don't do that, they won't be able to compete. Mr. Cuban, you said something earlier that really resonated with me. You commented about watching TV.
Yes, sir.
And watching young kids today and how they consume input is totally different than when we all grew up. But I think sometimes being in the Senate is like watching TV too. You think you're doing something, but you're really not doing much. And so I hope that today will be a little different. And I want to get your perspective, because you're in a unique position to have a unique perspective on this transaction. I would have thought you would have been a witness for an anti-position against this deal. And I want to talk about your HDNet experience and the roadblocks you had to innovation in getting your content out there. And are you concerned about the combination and the size of this deal harming your ability to be creative and innovate?
Well, let me give you some background. I own Access TV and HDNet Movies. Access TV started off as HDNet, which was the first all-high-definition TV network. And it was absolutely independent, and we continue to be independent. And let me also add something. Senator Klobuchar suggested that because I own the Dallas Mavericks, that improved my ability to get carriage for Access TV and HDNet Movies. Well, Time Warner Cable is the incumbent cable network in Dallas, and I have not been able to get carriage there. So I've faced the challenges. I also own Magnolia Pictures, which is a movie distribution company, Landmark Theaters, which has 300 screens and is geared towards independent movies, and have produced movies through a company called 2929 Distribution. Some of the movies were Enron, The Smartest Guys in the Room, which got nominated for an Academy Award, and Good Night and Good Luck. And Good Night and Good Luck, as an example, we weren't big enough to distribute it, so we worked through Warner Brothers to distribute, to get full distribution. We have to compete. As an independent network, I feel the pain that Ms. Simon feels. At Access TV, we gear ourselves as a music network geared toward the 45 plus. We don't like to tell our advertisers that, but that's who watches more TV. And it's a challenge for us to get distribution. But with the new methods of distribution, like DirecTV now and others, Sling in particular, that has opened the door. In the past, the distribution was constrained, as Ms. Simon mentioned, because of bandwidth. You couldn't put on another high-definition network, and particularly with standard definition, which took up even more bandwidth. And so now, with new methods of distribution, there's new hope. There's more hope for independent networks like ours, and I think this merger opens those doors. As an example, on DirecTV now, Access TV is distributed in their $35 bundle. HDNet Movies is not. We've got to do a better job at HDNet Movies to convince them to carry us. That onus is on me. And so, to your point earlier, it's very competitive. It's a free market still in a lot of respects, and I think this combination opens doors. I think they recognize now that bandwidth is more available through online offerings. They can support more independent networks, more minority-owned networks, and we've seen that start to happen. And I think the combination of them owning content, there's a lot of things when we look at online content and particularly television distributed content, and we say, why don't they do that? And it just makes perfect sense for us to have remote DVRs or other features. And as a content owner, it's like, I'd love to offer those features as a smaller content owner, but until the big guys start doing it and set the precedent, us little guys don't get to offer it. So these new precedents that are set, I think, will really push the way for better services and more consumer-friendly services and really expand the ability for independent networks to compete.
Yeah, thank you. Mr. Bucus, could you talk about what factors today add friction to your ability? This is pre-deal, before the deal, as you exist today. What causes friction to your ability to innovate, and how would this merger with AT&T help your content developers provide better and quicker and cheaper content for AT&T consumers?
Okay, thank you, Senator. The main friction now is that we have to put our networks through the existing cable satellite distribution plant, which had a certain technological ability to it. Only recently did it have the ability to do video on demand. And increasingly, we're competing against video being delivered over broadband only that has full two-way video on demand, and where the broadband services have the direct retail data of what you're watching, who you are, where you're buying your stuff. So it implicates advertising and subscription. What we've been trying to do is to, and we did it with HBO first and then with Turner second, but we really haven't been successful in the broad 100 channels we've all got in our homes. We tried to make our channels all video on demand in a way where you could go as a viewer and search back and forth, watch full seasons, really get the same, because there's more and more networks and content available. You need to be able to search for it the way you do on a Netflix or on an Apple TV or that kind of a thing. Most of the distribution companies, particularly cable companies, have not uniformly offered that. And the way that American consumers get a change in their habit about something as important as television is it has to be consistent across all the channels, and it has to be national. And we think if we can get this going, competition with lower prices, better, smaller bundles, more effective advertising can bring more competition in all of these areas. We don't obviously, and we can't, determine what all the other media companies do. We don't have that big of a market share. But if we can put a competitive innovation in the hands of consumers, we think consumers liking it can get those changes to be universally adopted. That would give us a chance against these giant technology companies that, by their own definition, have massive global scale.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have other questions I'd like to submit to the witnesses in writing.
Without objection, they'll be admitted. Thank you. Senator Blumenthal.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Thanks for having this hearing, and thank you all for being here. I have serious concerns about this transaction. I have yet to be convinced that the benefits outweigh the harms to competition and possibly to consumers. It is a vertical merger. It doesn't take out a competitor, but it potentially has seriously negative impacts on competition and on consumers. And it is different from the NBC-Comcast merger, which, as Mr. Kimmelman points out, has had problems itself and had to be modified by regulators. It involves wireless, it's a national platform, and it involves more than one platform. But speaking very bluntly, what I think, what any of my colleagues think, may make no difference whatsoever, because Donald Trump has said he's going to block this merger. And I take him at his word.
Why?
We operate as an act here. I know that, Mr. Stephenson, you've met with the Trump transition team. Have you met with the Trump transition team?
No, Senator, I have not.
Well, then what remains on the record is that the President of the United States, or I should say the future President of the United States, has said he's going to block this merger, and he said it emphatically and unequivocally, and he has said it because, and I quote, "It's too much concentration of power in the hands of too few," end quote. A classic antitrust analysis from the President-elect. Now, I'm a strong supporter of antitrust enforcement, and I may well agree with Donald Trump. What concerns me is the reason that he gave, an additional reason, which is that he is very unhappy with the CNN news coverage. And for a public official to use the blunt, heavy instrument of law enforcement to try to silence or change coverage by a news department of any company is, for me, absolutely abhorrent. Would you agree?
You're referring to me, I'm sorry.
I'm asking both you, Mr. Stephenson, and Mr. Bukis.
Senator, I'm a novice in the world of politics, so I would struggle to engage at that level. My expectation was when we announced this deal, and is today, that the Department of Justice will be the one reviewing this transaction and making the determination whether it's competitive or not, and is it competitive under the law. And so our expectation is to present our facts. We actually believe the facts are going to be very compelling and very good, that this is pro-competitive and pro-consumer. So I'll leave it at that.
Mr. Bukis?
Yes, and I entirely agree with what Mr. Stephenson just said. In terms of the independence of our journalism, and I hope all the other journalistic outlets, we have always vigorously defended that for decades, whether when we had Time Inc., whether and when we have CNN. And we intend to continue defending and being an independent journalistic voice. Everyone that watches us may have their own opinion about whether we succeed in being objective. We try hard every day, and we're going to continue to do that.
You understand that what troubles me is that the President-elect has said that his Justice Department with a different standard of law depending on what kind of coverage his administration receives. Will you commit that your news coverage will in no way be influenced or impacted by what the President of the United States says about this transaction?
Yes.
Mr. Stephenson?
Yes, sir, of course, yeah.
And wouldn't you agree with me that for anyone in the Department of Justice or any law enforcement agency to threaten or use more vigorous or aggressive law enforcement, in effect in retaliation for news coverage that doesn't please that public official, would be an abuse of power?
I would, if you're asking me. Now,
I'm asking you, and I'll turn to other members of the panel as well, but you're the ones who will be making decisions about CNN.
Well,
and by the way, the President has made similar kinds of remarks about NBC and about the Washington Post in terms of the enforcement of laws potentially against them, the President-elect.
May I make a comment?
Please do.
I don't think we should be selective about retweeting here or restating the various comments that various elected officials or those running for office made upon the announcement of this merger, because there were comments made by candidates on all sides, including Mr. Sanders, Mr. Kaine, saying that they were against the merger, again, before any of them had the information. And what Randall and I are saying is that we're confident that once everyone, and including the questions you've raised today, hears the facts and has the appropriate competitive analysis on this, that it will be seen and concluded by everyone, even with the concerns you've stated, that this will have pro-competitive effects that will benefit both competitive structures, diversity of voices, and consumer price alternatives. We believe it, and we think we can prove it.
And I just want that, I want to make clear that my point here is not that other candidates may have commented or not about this merger. It is perfectly appropriate for a public official or a candidate to comment on the merits of antitrust enforcement, but to threaten more vigorous or adverse enforcement against a particular company because he doesn't like the news coverage is a threat to the First Amendment. That's the fundamental point here. I'm a believer in strong antitrust enforcement. I welcome President-elect Trump's interest in this area. I find absolutely abhorrent the threat against a news organization based on its content of more vigorous or adverse enforcement against it simply because of a dislike of that coverage. And I welcome your commitment that his statements will have absolutely no impact on the content of CNN's coverage. I hope the same will be true of NBC and the Washington Post, because this kind of potential abuse of power is a threat to fundamental liberties way larger than the issues we're discussing right here. Thank you.
Senator Tillis.
Did he make an explicit?
Senator Tillis, you're up to bat.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to get back to the merger and the potential acquisition. And actually, I would like to start, Mr. Bukis or Mr. Stephenson, if you could briefly explain to me how this DirecTV Now product that you're offering and distributing through AT&T network, how you may enter into other relationships with other wireless providers to accomplish the same thing, and how would those transactions look?
Yes, thank you, Senator. Actually, we stole the concept for DirecTV Now with free data included from prior deals that we have done. And in fact, this premise of free data, if you will, with DirecTV Now, it actually goes back decades. The first instance of it was 1-800 service. When you called Sears and Roebuck, you dialed 1-800, and Sears and Roebuck picked up the tab for the long-distance service. And that actually drove long-distance prices down over time. I mean, all of a sudden, everybody started using that type facility to get people to call their franchise. So what happened then in 2008 is Amazon launched a really groundbreaking product called the Kindle. And we did a deal with Amazon where they actually, when you delivered a book to the Kindle, you paid $10 for your book. That included the data charge. Amazon paid AT&T directly that data charge. That's the concept that we took advantage of with DirecTV Now. DirecTV is paying the charge for the data to the mobility business. And by the way, that is our lowest wholesale rate available in the marketplace today to DirecTV, to Amazon, to any big, small, medium-sized company that wants to do this same approach. We're actually convinced that just like 800 service drove long-distance prices down, this will also drive video prices down as people begin to leverage the same capability.
I think that's right. And Mr. Cuban, I almost hesitate to even speak with a Hoosier after the devastating loss of the Tar Heels a week or so ago, but I'm going to anyway. In your opening comments, you were really talking about the disruptive nature of other content providers today. And I saw you shake your head on a couple of occasions when I think what we're trying to do, your comments kind of suggested that you're trying to skate to where the puck's going to be.
Correct.
And a lot of this discussion is where the puck is today.
Without question.
And if we don't look ahead, then some of these premier providers are going to be hamstrung against other ones, or against other disruptive forces that could ultimately, I think, create a consolidation and an upward pressure on prices. Would you agree with that?
Yes, sir. There's already a consolidation that we don't see going on. when I went through the list with Facebook, Amazon, all the content, the primary content that they offered came through acquisitions. Their biggest content plays were acquisitions. What's happening now, though, is they're not acquiring big companies like Time Warner. They're acquiring disruptive companies that are choosing not to go public for $100 million or $1 billion that flies completely under the radar. And that's how they're competing. And I'll give you a perfect example how the nature of, and it's kind of silly, but how the nature of content is changing. I wanted to test Facebook Live just to see what kind of audience I could get. No lie, I took my breakfast, empty plate, 1 pepper on it, put up Facebook Live, and within a minute, I had 1,500 live viewers. Within 30 minutes, I had 10,000 live viewers. I thought, okay, maybe that's just Facebook Live, it's new. I went to a new platform called Lively. I was with my kids. Again, I try to be a geek and keep up with this. My kids were going down a slide into the lake, and I just put it on them. On Lively, within 20 minutes, I had 35,000 live viewers. For an independent network, 35,000 live simultaneous viewers is huge. That's changing the nature. You know, CNN, a great program, is 2.5 million viewers watching it at a given point in time. That's nothing on Facebook Live compared to, in other platforms. It's changing, whether we want to admit it or not, and that's having significant impacts. And really the biggest challenge is getting people to watch TV. Mm-hmm. That's going to be, with all these things, you're hoping to find new ways where people go back and say, okay, I want to try watching TV again. And that'll increase science, and we see it with the NBA, we see it with the NFL, and all forms of contact.
Yeah, and I think something else that one of my colleagues mentioned was, well, first off, if I take a look at HBO, HBO became a premier channel not because they charge people to watch it, but because they have extraordinarily good content. Extraordinarily good content that people were willing to pay a premium for. But there's a lot of times when I'm channel surfing, which usually happens late at night, when I'm back in I don't get a channel surf as much when I'm at home because my wife can control the remote. But when I'm looking, I'm going through all these channels. I'm going, why am I going through all these, and am I paying for them? Cable, NBC is not free. ABC is not free. They're all negotiating some baseline costs that go into your baseline cable bill, and I would like to reach a point in time where I have the freedom to have options. A sportsless option seems like a very sad place to me, but some option to where I don't necessarily have channels that I consider extraneous based on my viewing habits. And then from time to time, I will pay a premium if I want to go and access content that may be on a channel that I would not regularly want to pay for because I don't have a need or a desire to have that. I mean, that's the model that we're getting to. And I think that if we don't, as a matter of I'll leave it to the Antitrust Division of the Department of Justice to ask you the right questions to make sure that you're not wading in any antitrust areas. But if we as a body resist, if we just continue to focus on where the puck is versus where the puck is going to be in terms of content delivery and this industry 10 years from now, then I think we're going to disadvantage some real innovators. There's some legitimate issues that need to be addressed, but we need to be very, very careful or we're going to cause some of the leading innovators in the world not to be able to innovate because of constraints we're putting on people using old world models to assess where the new horizons are for content delivery. Thank you.
Senator Flake.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks for having this hearing. It's been enlightening. I'm trying to view this all through the lens of my own kids. I have 2 married kids, newly married, who would no more sign up for DirecTV or Dish or broadcast than they would to get a landline in their home. That's just not something they would consider. They might try to crib off of my DirecTV, find out the password and use it, but they would never think of that. And that's why when I hear Mr. Zimmerman talk about this and the competitive angle, it seems like an excellent argument you're giving that would have been more appropriate 10 years ago or 15 years ago. But it doesn't seem to be where the puck is, or certainly where the puck is going. And I think we have to consider more who the competition really is, that this isn't traditional, antitrust competition among broadcast media, but among the edge providers. And Mr. Cuban, you talked in your statement about the real competition. Do you want to talk a little more about that, about who the real competitors are?
I mean, every apps compete for our time now. You know, as I mentioned, when we look for something to do, a way to kill time, we look at our phone. And all you have to do is look at the rise of Snapchat, the rise of Musical.ly, the rise of Lively, the rise of Instagram. That's what consumes our attention. Kids don't go to TV anymore. I mean, you mentioned your children. I have a 7-year-old, and I went to help coach his baseball team. And none of them knew the rules because none of them ever watched TV and watched baseball like we grew up doing. They didn't know the rules for football. I mean, I can't even bribe my son to go to a Cowboy game. That's just not how it is. But if I take away his Minecraft videos, he throws a hissy fit. And sure, our consumption habits change as we age, and I'm sure they will for all my kids, but at the same time, on-demand, in-hand viewing through streaming is how people consume content. And it's going to be a challenge, and I think they face additional challenges from a tech perspective. Randall mentioned 5G coming along, and I think it'll get here sooner rather than later. There's going to be people cutting the broadband cord. And just like you mentioned, your kids never would have thought to buy a landline. I tend to believe that there'll be a point in time where we won't think about wired broadband as being commonplace. And that's going to create a whole new list of challenges for them. So, technology marches on whether we like it or not, and I think we can't look backwards and look at historical norms in order to predict the value of this merger.
When Senator Blumenthal talked about the incoming president talking about going against this merger simply because of the size of it, how does this size of the merged company, how does the size compare to the real competitors we're talking about, some of the edge companies? Any figures there? Mr. Randall?
Yes, Senator. If you put our two companies together, the combined market cap, depending on the day you look at the market, is $350 billion. The companies that Mark has referenced, whether it be Google, Facebook, Apple, these companies have market caps that are about 2 times that size. So as we talk about size and the significance of size in a deal like this, I think we have to recalibrate what size means in this new world, because we're about half the size of most of these companies that are really providing the competitive threat to our core businesses today.
All right. Mr. Kimmelman, do you have any response to that in terms of where are we discussing what the market is or it was a few years ago?
Yes, Senator, I totally concur in your assessment. My kids do the same thing as yours. I think we should skate to where the puck is, and we should look at where the market's going. And I'll just note, on the margin, young people are doing different things. 90%, though, plus of the revenue comes from a lot of the traditional sources. And the companies will skate to where the puck is. They will try to control as much of that new distribution as possible. On the online platforms, I totally agree. There is a lot of attention. But what we used to do on phones, a lot of kids are now doing on Snapchat. What we used to do in terms of listening to records is now iTunes. It's not that TV has disappeared or video doesn't matter. It's people are doing it in new forms. So I'm all for looking at who the other players are, but none of them charge me $200 a month to get access to that online content. That's where your kids get it, and if they're mooching off of your DirecTV, that's probably why they don't want to pay $200 a month to get all this stuff. So somebody's paying, and I just want to make sure it's a fair price. But there is no question that the online platforms are going to be big players here, but they don't control that wire, wireless, whatever it is, even if it's not wired by broadband, satellite. They don't control that into our homes, and you can probably only get it from a couple players. That's where there is an antitrust problem. That's where there's a control problem that we want the enforcers to look at.
Who's paying for content? is that really relevant to the competitive nature of these kind of mergers? Mr. Cuban,
Yeah, I would say if you aren't paying for the content, you are the content. You know, you're being sold and advertising's paying for it. And I'd also say, like, my 10-year-old daughter doesn't have a cell phone account, but she has a phone. And she gets access to wireless through Wi-Fi at various distribution points. And she knows where they are, and she goes there. And I'm not just talking inside my house, I'm talking outside the home. So the notion that a wireless provider is the only way to access this content isn't necessarily the case anymore, and those options are expanding rapidly. And I'd also say, to respond to Gene, that Flurry, which is an app monitoring company, just came out this week and said for non-traditional TV type content, all consumers are consuming 133 minutes, more than 2 hours per day of non-TV like content on their phones. The world's changing, and how we consume it is changing, and it's not driven by pure mobile.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Flake. We're now going to start a second round of questions. Mr. Stephenson, let's go back to you. Section 5 of the FTC Act, as you're aware, permits the FTC to take action to prevent, quote, unfair or deceptive acts or practices in or affecting commerce. However, that provision contains a carve-out. It contains an exception for common carriers. And as I'm sure you're aware, the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit recently extended this exception to cover even aspects of AT&T and its activities that are non-carrier activities. Is it your position that Time Warner's business will become exempt from Section 5 of the FTC Act if this transaction is approved and kicks in?
Yeah, I'm not a lawyer, so I'll try to address your question as best I can. Obviously, with the net neutrality provisions, AT&T is our privacy standards and so forth are under the purview of the FCC. As with Time Warner, so Verizon has the same issue of buying AOL, buying Yahoo. So Comcast and NBC, you have the same issue where there's this confusion about a content company under the purview of the FTC, a common carrier per se is under the purview of the FCC. It is confusing. And I would suggest that this is an area perhaps where Congress really should consider taking up, bringing some clarity, because it's not that we have regulation gaps in this area, it's that we have regulation overlaps, and it is a bit confusing as to who controls who. So I would actually encourage perhaps maybe some legislative effort to address this issue.
Sure, and I get that. I get that we have some regulation overlap. We're not talking about regulation overlap here. We're talking about a gap. We're talking about a carve-out, and I would imagine you'd have to agree that if that were the case, if the exemption for Section 5 currently enjoyed by AT&T also extended to Time Warner, if this transaction were completed, that would be cause for concern by some. I assume you would acknowledge that.
Yeah, I believe the law is that if AT&T owned Time Warner, they would come under the FCC's purview in terms of regulating these issues.
Okay. I've got another line of questions that I'd like to extend both to you, Mr. Stephenson, and to Mr. Bucas jointly. So when Comcast and NBC completed their merger back in 2011, you recall there were some concerns expressed by CNBC and others, and or rather concerns expressed by Bloomberg and others relative to CNBC. And there were conditions put in place to guarantee that Bloomberg would have access. It ended up taking 3 years of litigation to bring that about. Shouldn't we be concerned about the possibility that any conditions put in place here designed to guarantee access to your network might not be followed in much the same way that this required 3 years of litigation, expensive, time-consuming litigation, occurred in the wake of this other merger?
I've been asked a lot about conditions imposed on other companies in this regard, and I'm not knowledgeable about the ability of those companies to comply with those conditions. I would tell you we have had several mergers where conditions have been imposed on us. I think you would find that our track record in adhering to those has been very strong. I would also suggest that the Department of Justice has not seemed to have any lack of resources in pursuing areas where they believe we were out of compliance with conditions. And so I fully expect that if any conditions are applied to this particular transaction, we'd comply with those just as we have every other transaction.
Did you have anything to add to that, Mr. Bucas?
Yes, I think the same is true in the history of Time Warner. We had a merger with AOL where some agreements on carriage of other networks were made and they were followed with no incident. And then in the Turner and Time Warner merger, we had conditions which also were followed without incident. So our record is there is no instance in which we did not comply with any conditions we had in our various mergers.
Right. And of course, I'm not talking about your companies in particular, but your companies in particular are the ones that want to become one company right now. And you can understand why some people would express this concern. I mean, you do own some news entities, and there are other news entities that have expressed concerns that they might be blocked out for one reason or another, either through pricing models or as a result of where you locate them, what number they're assigned. What channel they're assigned, whether it's put in the same grouping as other news outlets or otherwise. Do you understand why people might have that concern?
Yes, sir, I do. And I don't think those are terribly unique to other concerns people have expressed in past mergers that we've been a party to. And I do believe that those have been adequately addressable with concessions and conditions. And I will repeat, I think both companies have a stellar, flawless track record in complying with those conditions.
Ms. Simon, you state that over-the-top distribution is, as I believe you put it, a one-way ticket to bankruptcy. Can you explain why this is not what you would consider a viable business model for independent networks?
Well, right now, the OTT market doesn't have the amount of subscribers that make it a business. Number one, it's a maze of confusion, as I said before. It's a search engine nightmare, for a lot of people that aren't used to it. Mr. Cuban's children are much more used to it than some people that are a little older. But at the same time, in order to get, number one, license fees, that's impossible. And in order to get advertisers to advertise with you at such a small market, it wouldn't work. Plus, you need to be able to use the linear service in order to actually get your brand known to the public. And at the same time, you need to be able to show the public that you're delivering a network that is curated and that meets their interests and their needs in order for them to then also want some VODs over the OTT market. We are actually distributing cinema over the OTT market. But the reality is it's a very fragmented market right now and confused market. And therefore, if we relied on it solely, it would be a one-way ticket to bankruptcy because you can't survive. You have the obligation, we are all gatekeepers to the communication media. That's a fiduciary responsibility to deliver to the public content that is quality-oriented, that they deserve. That means that you have to spend money in either licensing content or original productions. I disagree with some of the people that think that HBO is there because of distribution. HBO is there because of quality. Many people, many stars come to us as a small company and give their services for very small amount of money because of the quality of the programming that we ask them to participate in. The reality is we still have to spend the money. We still have to convince advertisers to go along with some of this. That's impossible. In order to get an advertiser interested, you have to have a distribution of 55 million subscribers. That's almost impossible right now because the MVPDs are shutting the doors on independence, on innovation, on good quality original programming. Unless you're a bundle, you don't have any negotiating power. I mean, Mr. Cuban is partners with CBS. It's a different story, and even he couldn't get a Time Warner. It's an impossible marketplace right now, and we need to improve it. And if we really look at what is happening here, we're moving towards an oligopoly. And if you look at Taiwan, for instance, where 6 conglomerates own all the media, when they want different content, they simply trade at the cost of the public, which is rising and rising, and at the cost of free speech.
Thank you. Senator Klobuchar.
Thank you very much. Apologize for leaving briefly. Senator Mikulski was giving her closing speech of her Senate career, and then we had a big event on Cuba, and I carried the bill to lift the embargo. So as opposed to Mr. Cuban, I was with the Cubans. I wanted to kind of go back to some of these cost issues. Mr. Kimmelman, the money the typical American household, which you mentioned, spends on these services, $2,700 per year, continues to trouble me, and I'm concerned that this transaction won't reduce that burden, and I think you argue there could be a chance that it would increase it. Is this a legitimate concern, and why?
Senator Klobuchar, I think that that's the baseline, and it is the result, if you look at a 20-year period, of consolidation and limited regulatory oversight during periods of that have enabled prices to be inflated. There is competition on the margin. There's new competition coming from new sources, but it's hard to squeeze that out. I will say that with what is being offered now in the market that includes what Time Warner is offering and AT&T, there is hope. The online platform is opening up some, and they're offering new products and new services, and some at lower prices. The real fear is whether the combined company, once it looks at its overall interests, will favor itself and potentially harm competitors.
Right.
So that's where the rub comes on the prices. They might offer a better price, and they may offer it for some time, but in the long run, will the competitive process be benefited? That's what I think the enforcers need to look at.
So you see this as there is a chance that it could be another model rather than just the monthly cable?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think in some ways, I think that's our only hope.
Okay,
for all the reasons everyone here has stated.
Okay, but you're concerned about a few things. One is that the prices maybe initially, I think, whatever it is, $60 or something, and then it goes up, and that it would be $35 for 100 channels, but then it goes up. And so you're worried about that, and you're also worried that there would be less competition for, say, content and things like that, and eventually we have problems because of that. And you think you could build some conditions into that or not?
Well, let me just say, part of the reason for the longer-term concern is that Comcast already vertically integrated and has all the NBCU suite of programming. Mm-hmm. Here you have Time Warner programming. Now, will they compete aggressively against each other? I certainly hope so. But in a market where there are few vertically integrated companies, there is a danger that they'll buy more. Mm-hmm. CBS, Viacom, who knows, to escalate against each other, but also possibly follow the same basic market business structure and deal with each other, maybe even at pretty high prices because they pass those on to the consumer in their own market, but then charge them through to every other distributor in the market. Again, if somebody can come up with something comparable to HBO, they can compete against it. It's been tough. There are only a few major content providers that provide that high-quality professional content, and we tend to get locked into that. So yes, you buy other things on the side, but that just means you're paying more for other things. Mm-hmm. That's why the bill is so high.
And Mr. Stephenson, just I know you're going to answer that, but so $35 for 100 channels is a good deal, but isn't that an introductory price, and it's going to go up to $60 or something like that? So
these two go together, but I think it's important to understand why we put a $35 product out in the marketplace. And it's because the other system, the old system, is just flat out broken. Content costs continue to escalate, cable bills continue to go up, and we're at a $100 average cable TV bill, and 20 million households have opted out. They've left the system. They said, we don't want this product anymore, it's too expensive. So we brought this product to market to address those 20 million households, and it is proving we found the sweet spot. So it's not as though we have pricing power down here. The pricing power doesn't exist because the customer said, we opt out if you don't meet this price point. So we have tried to get the cost down, the content cost down, the distribution cost down, no set-top boxes, to ensure that we can get into a market and hit a price point that the customers will come back into the pay TV system. And they're doing it. I think as soon as we think we can begin to move prices up and take advantage of that, they have demonstrated they'll leave us again. So I think we're bound on this, and I think we've reached a place with the consumer that they're happy, and I think they're willing to enter this marketplace again.
To get at some of Ms. Zimon's points, in your testimony you say, Mr. Stephenson, in short, we are still going to purchase high-quality content from all corners of the content community and will continue to distribute Time Warner programming widely. Am I understanding your position correctly, then, that after the acquisition, AT&T would not discriminate against independent content providers in favor of Time Warner content?
I don't think we have a choice. The business proposition is you better have a wide array of content. There are too many alternatives. You will lose customers if you do not. Now, I think we've pointed out an interesting dilemma here. We want a broad, wide range of content brought into this ecosystem, and everybody wants to be paid for their content, whether it gets broad viewership or not. At the same time, we're being challenged. Can you get prices down, get prices down, get prices down? The two are inconsistent, all right? So we have to figure out what content do the customers want, not what do we want, not what does the government want, but what do the customers want.
Get it? But you, at the same point, what I'm asking about is, would you discriminate against non-Time Warner content?
Again, yeah, I don't see it. There is no advantage to it, nor would we do it.
And so how do we determine at this point where contract negotiations between providers and distributors are long, difficult, and complicated, how do we determine whether AT&T has lived up to that commitment?
I think we ought to allow the Department of Justice to formulate an approach for doing that.
Okay. Mr. Bukes, my last question here. In your testimony, you explained that, quote, Time Warner's goal has always been to distribute our content broadly across all distributors and platforms. So am I understanding this correctly, that after the acquisition, Time Warner will not limit the availability of Time Warner content to content distributors that compete with AT&T?
Right, correct.
Okay. And we've heard that one can deny content through the offered terms and prices. How would we determine that AT&T or that you were living up to this commitment if there's some kind of discrimination based on prices?
Well, again, I think the DOJ will be able to easily see that. We've got fairly uniform contract provisions across all distribution platforms. So all of the, if you think of Verizon, AT&T, Comcast, all the different companies, they've all quite vigorous in the negotiation, and it's a very competitive situation. So everyone would know, because they would not accept terms that were not equal for what they could get on from other content providers.
Okay. My last question, Mr. Kimmelman, just because I've had some of the incomings of some of these complaints. The Comcast-NBC Universal merger was approved with conditions, as you know. How effective do you think those conditions were in preventing anti-competitive harm? Because I think it will inform the Justice Department and agencies and this committee as we go forward in terms of what conditions we think would be appropriate.
Senator, I think it's a mixed bag. I mean, I think that the fact that Netflix has grown, the fact that Sling TV has been able to get Comcast NBCU programming are the more positive signs. Some of the big companies have been able to take advantage of that. I think smaller companies have come up short. Even Bloomberg went through a 3-year excruciatingly painful dispute over that. I mean, the problem with conditions is exactly the questions you were just asking. Is it discrimination? Are the prices the same? Here, it's even more complicated than with Comcast because it's nationwide distribution. It's wireless, which has some inherent latency problems and issues where the bandwidth isn't enough, and there's some legitimate reasons why you're not getting the quality you want, but then there could be some finger on the scale. And I will say that as much as I firmly respect the Justice Department's ability to enforce conditions, I know they do not have the engineers and the network experts to look at all these kind of issues. They're very aware of that. So these are very difficult areas to thoroughly police if there is an inclination to discriminate.
Very good. All right. Thank you, all of you.
Senator Franken.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I Googled my phone, Wayne Gretzky and where the puck is going. And the first entry is, in the annals of overused corporate cliches, few match the immortal words of Walter Gretzky as passed on to the world through his son Wayne: skate to where the puck is going, not to where it has been. So congratulations to several of us for using the most overused corporate cliche.
I must have really missed something.
You did.
Yeah.
You were listening to Barbara Mikulski talk about, I doubt, about hockey. I want to, I'll tell you where the puck is going. It's going to wireless. Okay? So, Mr. Stephenson, I want to talk briefly about data-free TV, which allows AT&T customers to stream DirecTV without incurring any data charges. AT&T's white paper on the topic suggests that this offering is not discriminatory against other programmers or over-the-top competitors because they can pay the exact same rate that DirecTV pays AT&T for the privilege. However, as I understand it, the FCC has done the math and estimates that it would cost an unaffiliated mobile video service provider like Netflix or Hulu far more to participate in the program than the $35 a month that DirecTV currently charges. The FCC argues then that participation in the program would make it difficult, if not infeasible, for a DirecTV Now competitor to offer its customers a competitively priced service. So my question is, Mr. Stephenson, explain again how your company is not taking money out of how this isn't anti-competitive, because you'd be taking money out of your right pocket and putting it in your left pocket if DirecTV is paying a lower, if you're paying a lower price and you're basically supplementing them. And as the FCC asked in its most recent letter to you, how exactly does DirecTV make payments to AT&T Mobility for this service, and do the respective entities record such payments?
I don't know what exactly the payment mechanism is across entities.
I think it would be good that you did know it.
The results reflect, well, I don't know if we actually do a wire transfer or if there's just a journal entry to record the transfer, but at the end of the day, the results of DirecTV do indeed reflect that cost that's paid to our mobility business. They do. And so when you look at the margins of DirecTV, they reflect that cost in it. And there is a cost incurred by delivering mobility. It's a variable cost business. To put another megabyte.
But how do we know that you can't be favoring something that you own, DirecTV, as opposed to some entity that would like to have their data delivered free to the consumer?
We are charging everybody the exact same, the lowest wholesale price for data transport that we have. Everybody gets the same. Big companies, small companies.
Well,
Companies are buying.
I'm not sure about that assurance. How do we know that?
We can provide the data. The Justice Department can look at this and get themselves comfortable with the data. It's just a data question, right? And we can make the data available. That's not a difficult thing to do. Is that what your question is?
It sounds difficult to me because we don't know how do you compute that? I mean, this is basically unlimited data for your user to DirecTV. So in other words, if some other provider that's parallel to DirecTV wanted to get free data or wanted that service delivered by AT&T to stream them, how do we know that you're not giving DirecTV a deal because you own it?
This is a mechanism that's been used in our industry for decades, and there is a pricing mechanism, same terms and conditions. We will not discriminate against others who want to provide the same service. So it's been going on for decades.
Okay, Mr. Kimmelman, could you speak to Mr. Stephenson's characterization of AT&T's track record on complying with commitments as spotless?
Senator, all I can say is I think it's a great company, and I think they are a very aggressive competitor. Sometimes aggressive competitors can step over the line. There have been varieties of complaints at different points in time. I don't think it's worth going into it in great detail. I mean, these will be reviewed by the agencies. They're a wonderful company, but everybody who's competing hard sometimes competes a little too hard. And that's nothing new in the marketplace. The issue is whether
a year ago, AT&T was slapped with a $25 million fine for failing to protect its subscribers' personal information. Mr. Stephenson, about a year ago, he and I discussed how his company lobbied to prevent municipalities from building their own broadband networks to meet their community's needs. This is using your competitive advantage. And I'd love to see that data. And I think that, by the way, I would like to see the FCC involved in this. When in the Bloomberg dispute, that was the FCC dealing with that. That was not, because you said, DOJ has all these resources. That was the FCC dealing with Bloomberg, right?
That's correct, Senator.
Yeah.
But the consent decrees in these things are with the Department of Justice.
Well, in a number of these cases, Senator, there have been parallel commitments at the FCC with an understanding the FCC would do the enforcement because they are the regulator of the industry with expertise. So I will say there were, for example, on access to programming in Comcast NBCU, there were restrictions put in place. The Department of Justice decided not to impose those because the FCC was putting those in place. There were parallels for trying to block online innovation in video, and the Department of Justice consent decree said they would defer to the FCC for enforcement action in most or nearly all instances. So each one of those, at least, involved dual agency action with a reliance on the FCC for the deep industry expertise. May I also just mention one thing, Mr. Chairman, you had raised the Section 5 issue. I just want to point out that we believe the court decision was horrible and it needs to be appealed, but there is a gap here that I think Mr. Stephenson missed, which is that if they purchase Time Warner and they have content, the FCC can only regulate their common carriage business, regardless of how the court wanted to look at it. They are restricted by Congress to only looking at common carriage assets, which I do not believe these assets would be, and many of their other value-added services or anything that's an online service. So there is a gap there that I think is significant.
I would not, I'm not smart enough, knowledgeable enough of that particular area, particularly as it relates to content, to refute that. I just do think it points out, though, that there is a need to get clarity around the regulations over these issues. Yeah.
Are we going to go to a third round, or can I complete my questioning?
If you've got another question, go ahead.
Sure. Mr. Stephenson, I want to turn now to something you said at a Wall Street Journal live event. you shrugged off the comparison of your deal to Comcast, NBC Universal, saying that one of the biggest regulatory concerns around that deal, net neutrality, has largely been resolved. Now, that event happened prior to November 8th, so I'm going to give you another chance to address the comparison. Mr. Stephenson, do you still think the concern over ensuring net neutrality has largely been resolved? And as an historic opponent of net neutrality, are you going to urge President-elect Trump to enforce the open internet order and ask Republicans in Congress to halt their plans for legislation repealing the order in order to get the deal approved?
I'd like to first suggest I am not a strong opponent of net neutrality. I have, 2010, been an advocate of the net neutrality principles. No blocking, no discrimination, no paid prioritization. We helped craft those rules, worked with Senator Waxman to help craft the rules that we hoped would become law. We actually worked.
Wait, didn't you go to court against?
We went to court against Title II categorization of our services. That is not synonymous with net neutrality. Net neutrality has historically been defined by this body in the Senate and historically at the FCC as no blocking, no discrimination, no paid prioritization. The FCC chose to take a much broader approach and put all wireless and broadband services under Title II regulations, a 1939-based regulation for these services that are moving and transitioning fast. You went
to court before they did that. You went to court, which basically forced them to do that.
No, sir, we did not. No, we did not. The 2010 rules that were imposed, Verizon opposed those in court. We did not.
Okay.
We supported them and we helped craft them.
Okay, then I stand corrected, I guess. It's not the first time. So thank you. I just wanted to, I guess I'm done. I would like to see the FCC, by the way, have jurisdiction here. Mr. Kimmelman, would you? Yeah.
Yes, Senator Frank. I mean, again, I think that there's a legitimate role. There's a question of exactly how that jurisdiction is divided and what assets is involved in the transaction that is for the companies and the FCC to work out. But at least as compared to previous transactions that are similar, I think it would be beneficial to the public policy process.
But Mr. Stephenson and Mr. Bucas, you have not committed to submitting your deal for review by the FCC. That's correct?
We're working through that process right now, Senator. The trigger for FCC review is whether we assume any licenses from Time Warner. We're going through, they own access to over 100 licenses. We're going through license by license, discerning which license do we need to actually transfer. So till we get through that review, we can't state whether there'll be an application with the FCC or not. Now, I would suggest to you that the DOJ, as Mr. Kimmelman has pointed out, looks at the FCC on a lot of these matters for expertise. I have no doubt the DOJ will continue to work with the FCC as they go through this review. We will also keep the FCC posted on our process, whether we do a formal filing or not.
Well, it's just that there's a different level that you have to meet, whether it's FCC or DOJ. And FCC, their merger review requires that any proposed deal actually benefits consumers. So I would think that the message you're sending to us and the current and potential AT&T consumers, if you can't confidently assert that this deal benefits the American public, is not a great message. Mr. Kimmelman, do you think the FCC should review this deal?
Yes, Senator Franklin. If it's within their jurisdiction at all, I believe they should. I think it would add a benefit to the overall public policy analysis.
Okay, thank you.
I want to thank all of you for coming and participating today, for answering our questions and providing your testimony. We've received a statement from Mr. Patrick Gosh that'll be admitted into the record. The record will remain open for a week for additional questions and submissions. This hearing will be adjourned.
And we'll continue with live coverage now as we take you to a U.S. Navy ceremony marking the 75th anniversary of the attack on Pearl Harbor. The Japanese attack led to the U.S. declaring war on Japan and Germany and entering World War II.